Joe? Good. How about you?
I'm tired.
Are you?
Got in late last night from Glacier,
Oh,
and so I got to bed about 2 o'clock in the morning.
oh,
After again winding down from the aggravation Frontier caused. And the connections were late anyway. We really would have gotten home at 11 o'clock because the flight.
where were you, Glacier?
Yeah.
Where's that?
Place. Have you been there?
Where is it?
Glacier National Park.
Oh.
Montana.
Have not.
And actually, we stayed in Canada at the Prince of Wales Hotel on the Canadian side of Glacier. And that was an extraordinary experience.
Did you have to go through
Customary
time to go back and forth?
Well, you only do it once, but.
But I mean, you go into the park, you
Well,
stayed over there, and then you go into the
well,
United
no,
States.
Canada has a Canadian side.
Oh, I see, an ex.
So Waterton Canyon, Waterton Lake, so we were on that side for the weekend after driving the what is it, Go to the Sun Highway across
Oh, yeah.
water.
Just you and Betsy? Yeah, good fun trip, huh?
Very fun. Montana, what a gorgeous state.
Montana's beautiful. It's so isolated though. That's when you probably travel. It's beautiful.
That could be a good thing, though.
Winter could be tough, I think.
I know my brother-in-law used to be Southern Marine, he's always wanted to live in
Uh-huh.
Montana. They live in North Carolina.
That was one where
He always would love to go to Montana. I said, "Yeah, but and be 50 miles away from the nearest living school."
Yeah.
And I said, "Of course, you know, it's had to be a whole everything system.
So all we can really be doing is
It might sound good when you're 50, but when you're 70.
Oh, yeah.
now
You
it's
want
a
people
little
closer, yeah, yeah.
You can't do that.
It's not
I
always,
said, come to Colorado, then you can be isolated, but.
It's kind of a mix, yeah, it's, all the
it's kind of
above.
refreshing to get away from all the development. But, you know, long
Or to have
term,
a place, like that would camping, hunting,
you can hunt grizzlies if
They can hunt you.
that's exactly it. My bear dog now.
Or put it up in a tree.
We went,
Hold
I don't even want to throw a tree in tent.
we went camping,
There aren't any trees in the park, so.
we went up camping at, near Nettles and Forest Service. And they had bear boxes in on campsites.
Like what?
Bear boxes, metal boxes.
Oh, put your stuff in?
Put your stuff in. They said, don't even put it in your car. So break it.
Yeah, we can start.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we should start, and just, there's a couple of things she said she wanted to be here for, but I
Yeah.
don't think we'll get very far in 15 minutes.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you, everyone, board and everyone else for your time this morning. Just a couple of procedural items. We are recording this. It's going out on the ground because it's being taped. So if you could use your mics so we could enhance.
Tape, audio and visual?
Yep.
Video? Okay,
Yep.
all right. We're just not going to watch ourselves, right? Okay.
That
Because I
is-
know other people are watching, so that's great, thank you.
Okay, good. Fabulous. The refreshments across the way there. We have this morning's meeting scheduled until 12 o'clock, and we'll see how that proceeds and confirm and schedule future meetings as it relates to that. Jeff has got, so we'll primarily work off the screen here, and Jeff will be driving, but he's got the agenda for this morning. First item on, so the process is similar to what we've done in past years. We try to have a couple of reviews with the board and the finance committee, grinding down in the detail as much as you need. And those are tentatively scheduled for this morning and tomorrow morning. We are looking for a board review of any pending items at the September 12th meeting, and then ultimately adoption of all the budget items at the October 10th meeting. And those are tentative, based on how things go, but that's the schedule at this point in time. What we'd like to do is go through a quick assumption review. We think it's pretty important that obviously, some of the assumptions we're using in developing the budget. We'll quickly go over the revenues, revenue oversight, and then we'll jump into the operating and capital budgets. And traditionally, how we've done this, we look at what are called the governmental type of activities initially, and then we'll hop into at the end, and it's typically day 2, all our utility operations. So we'll just kind of grind through that. So any questions from anyone before we get started? So in lieu of grinding through the Excel document the entire time, we've got a little PowerPoint we just wanted to go through to give kind of an overview of the budget. So I'm going to kind of change positions. It'll be easier for me to do this from the podium and just kind of run through this. Thank you, Jeff. So, as everyone knows, the budget's a pretty important document as it relates to implementation of the board's policy, communication tool, and we give it the time and respect that it's needed. Staff has been working on this thing since it was really a year-round process, but we began in earnest again in May, and now we'll grind through until October to get it finalized. The total budget is about $45 million, and to put that in context, that's about the same we've had the last couple of years. It's just been increasing a little bit over the last few years, but it's broken up into the board sits with 6 separate hats, but essentially we'll talk about all town operations, but technically you sit as with a Metro District hat and Urban Renewal Authority hat, so that's why we will have these different budgets. But at the end of the day, we talk about a $45 million budget. The primary revenue source, so this is getting into some of the revenue assumptions, but the primary revenue source for municipalities here in Colorado is sales tax. So we just kind of wanted to give a reminder of how important that is for funding of all our particular operations. Superior is not different than any other municipality. All municipalities continue to see, some levels of stress with this, very critical revenue source. A big part of it is the continuing transition to online sales from what we call brick and mortar sales, or sales in the Costco's and Targets of the world. I think we saw a recent report that came out that said last year sales increase online were over 10%, brick and mortar sales dropped by a couple of percent, and that trend is continuing. Why that's important for us as a statutory town is that you've read that there are more retailers who are collecting and remitting online sales tax. The problem that we run into is they may be doing that. So if you in Superior are buying something online, you may see some sales tax rate assigned to your particular purchase. It's probably never technically right. It may be the state rate at 2.9%. It may be the blended rate of a little over 8%. Even if it's the 8% rate, I can tell you generally, and Jeff can vouch for this, is that money may in fact be collected, charged to you, might be collected by the retailer, and it might actually be remitted to the state of Colorado. But then there's a disconnect then on getting it back down to the town of Superior. So we get some marginal online sales from some of the retailers, but it's not working as it should be working. And we continue to try to work with the Department of Revenue, but there's just a flaw in that particular process.
Paul, does that get better in a home rule scenario?
It does. We've seen some of the larger home rules, in particular with the Auroras, the Denver, the Colorado Springs of the world. You work with actual and strike deals with the actual retailers. That they have the clout, so you have more flexibility. Can I tell you that if we would consider going home rule, and one of the reasons was to try to collect that online retail sales tax, would we get it 100% probably not, but it would be better. I can say with a fair amount of confidence, it would be better than the process that we have right now.
Okay, thank you.
Just one more comment about that. Most of the time, which I don't do very often, but if I do buy things online and have them shipped to my home, usually the rate is like 3.8%, which is a Colorado rate plus some other RTD or something like that, or 3 something, it's never the 2 something. But I rarely ever, I can't even remember the last time I paid the full 8+% for sales tax. So none of that would, online, if like near 4% is collected, none of that would come to the town of Superior. Would that be correct?
If the assumption is that it's probably a state rate, maybe an RT rate, maybe the cultural and facilities district rate would get it up to that 4% rate, anything but maybe the municipal rate and the county tax rate. I think that's probably a safe assumption to make, but I don't know what Amazon is embedding in their 4%.
Yeah.
And to whom they're remitting that to. But
Right. Usually it's all state-based rates, but not municipal rates.
Right.
So I think we should keep that in mind, too, if we look at it, look at sales tax and how much more we might be able to get from whatever sources that, usually the online is only the state, not calculated rate, but not necessarily the municipalities that you live in. Thank you.
We're also seeing all the municipalities in Colorado kind of a somewhat change in spending patterns as the age of folks increases, the average age in Colorado increases. There's been some definitive studies that have shown that the spending patterns change. And to some degree, they change from a spending for taxable, tangible items, the TV and Costco, to some other items. Travel and healthcare are the two that are typically mentioned. So again, those, and just kind of bringing up some big picture items that we continue to see those as stress to our primary revenue source here. So in spite of those items and maybe some other items, we're actually anticipating some relatively robust growth next year at 4%, and then over the 5-year plan at 3.5%. The 4% growth is driven primarily by a couple of very specific things going on here. We are anticipating some more retail in the sports stable area, the ice hockey area et al. The Centerpoint development across the street that's going up right now. And we continue to get infill in the Superior marketplace. So, those numbers generally are good, 3.5% to 4%. They're maybe not as good as they could be because we've got some additional reminders that this is all predicated on no loss of a major retailer, which happens, or no cannibalization of a retailer, or a retailer would go into a neighboring jurisdiction's entity and maybe cannibalize some of our particular sales.
What are the additional retail that's going in the sports stable?
We are getting minor things, but we're getting coffee shops. We're getting some sales tax remittance from Ice Time. We'll have Brunelleschi's going in there. So,
the equipment sales, though, it was over here. Now it just moved over there, so there's really no change there. Right?
There really isn't a change. I mean, we're anticipating probably more equipment sales. I mean, you went from 1 sheet of ice to 2.5 sheets of ice, but also we have a change there in that it moved from an area that the town was collecting 100% of the sales tax to an area now that we are required to share half of that sales tax with the city of Louisville. So there's that dynamic coming into play as well.
So how much of the 4% is due to new revenue source versus what we actually think growth will be? Growth to our existing base? Is that like 2% from each, 2%? You know what I'm saying. How much is just due to growth on the existing base in sales tax, and how much of that 4% is from new sales tax sources of revenue?
You hit the nail on the head. It's about 2 and 2 split.
Okay.
And
So I think we should keep that in mind as we think about if it doesn't actually come out to be a full 4%, we should think about that we might only have a 2% growth in sales tax and not actually a 4% growth as we think about money that we're going to spend, because the 2% is speculative at this time. I'm talking of the 4, 2% is based on new sources of sales tax which haven't actually shown up yet. Centerpoint will be there, but some of the rest might not.
And those,
Isn't it all speculative, though?
Well, it is, but if
Whether
you
it's
build a
new
budget based
business-
on that you're going to get brand-new business that may not materialize, it's a little different than looking at trends in what's happening in the rest of the market world, you know, and the growth in the state. You know, anticipating or expecting, putting all your new eggs, your new brown eggs, in a shiny new basket isn't always a good thing, and I know you won't do that.
I would say, you know, Paul and Jeff have been doing this for a long time. They're pretty conservative when they come up with these numbers. I mean, really conservative, and they've been pretty accurate over the years.
Yeah, I'm not questioning their ability. I'm definitely, I just wanted to help all of us understand that it's not 4% because we're getting greater retail sales of the existing stores. It's that we're adding some new stores and restaurants as well.
no, that's a good point. And when we drill into the actual budget, you'll see, you know, we're talking about 4% increase, but you'll see that the net effect is going to be 2%, primarily because of this next bullet point, where we need to remember most of our revenues are generated in the marketplace, about 3/4 of the town's sales tax revenues. And we have an existing agreement to reimburse the initial developer for public improvements there. So, you know, about 50 cents on the dollar go for that particular payment. And there are two components to that. There's some outstanding debt, and there's some outstanding something known as an additional developer obligation, but it's essentially the same thing. We will have that, just to kind of give you a foreshadowing here when most of you are off the board, but that will be done by 2021. And assuming all things, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail, that generates about $2 to $2.5 million goes to the developer to pay off the debt, to pay off those public improvements. It'll be paid off after 2021, and after that point in time, assuming we still have a viable marketplace over there, which, you know, all indications are that we'll have, then potentially those are monies that will start coming to the town. And then the other component there is with the, as I mentioned earlier, within the Superior Town Center, essentially on the parcel there, it's roughly 168 acre parcel on the 80 acres to the north. That's in a revenue share area with the city of Louisville, and we share half of those sales tax revenues in perpetuity. So just as reminders. So again, just quick snapshots of how important sales tax is. 6 out of every $10 for the general fund is sales tax. Pretty much all our CIP and open space programs come from sales tax revenues. About half of the revenues for the interchange district, for, you know, some of the capital improvements and ongoing maintenance for the interchange area. All of the revenues to pay back this developer incentive for the infrastructure for the Superior Marketplace. And this one's actually rather intriguing. This has to do with the support to our utility operations. We still support our utility operations with sales and use tax. This number in the past, we're projecting over the 5-year period, it's trending down. It'll be a very, very small part of that pie, only 7%, and that was roughly 20 or 30% in the past. But with debt refundings and new growth generating some tap fee revenues, we are getting to a point. And I can honestly say, I didn't think we'd be able to do this quickly, but we're getting to the point where those utilities soon enough are going to be standing financially on their own, and we will not need these large transfers. Large is relative, but for the last 6 or 8 years, it's been $1.5 million a year that come over from the general fund to help these utility operations. New construction has been factored in the particular budget, and we've got a takeaway that identifies what new construction we're talking about here. But from my perspective, I would say new construction within town generally has a positive fiscal impact with all town operations. Looking at the type of construction that comes in, typically it's higher value residential, which, you know, generates some good property tax revenues. Conversely, those new residents coming in town have limited demands on services, on our police services, on our public works and parks, rec, and open space services. And really where this helps is it really helps the utility when the 2 decades ago, when the utility infrastructure was built, predominantly the water and wastewater plants, they were built to accommodate about a municipality, a town, about twice the size of what we have now. So as these new connections come in, the new connections at Coal Creek Crossing, We already have our utility plant size to handle that particular load. We have our water portfolio in place, other than firming up Windy Gap, to provide water to those particular services. So that's net new one-time revenue that helps offset really the debt load in some new capital projects. Over this 5-year period of time, these new developments coming in town are bringing in net, after we're factoring out some new operating expenses, net new revenues of over $20 million, $19 million in one-time revenues and $4 million in ongoing revenues. So again, I know there's dialogue about this occasionally, but from finance department's perspective, new developments generally have a net positive fiscal impact. These are really more takeaways, and you have this information in your supplemental book, but these are some of the developments we're assuming are going to happen over the 5-year period of time. And we can, and we can talk about these, and the board has seen some concept plans on some of them. And we try, and there may be some ebb and flow as it relates to the timing of this, but I think probably the wild card in this is for the town center right now, we're only assuming 117 residential units going in. That was with the FDP that I think you approved a couple of months ago. This is the Wonderland Home type development. And I think all indications are there will probably be more residential development in the town center over the 5-year period on top of this 117. But I guess to some degree, and Matt beats me sometimes with this, but we try to stay somewhat fiscally conservative. Again, any new development generally will have a positive impact here in town.
So Paul, the 19 million is only associated with those that you've got listed here?
With these 3 pages here, with these
Yeah,
residential.
Right, all of these.
That's correct.
With only next year's growth in Superior Town Center, the 117.
Right, and
Okay.
we've got to factor over the next 2 years. That is correct.
Oh, you've got more in there for the next couple of years.
I'm sorry, so the 117 units we just have coming in the budget over a couple of years.
So the 19 million, which was on your previous chart,
Mhm.
the new only includes 117 units in the Superior Town Center.
That is correct. That's
Okay.
one of the components with all these other components add up to the $19 million.
Okay.
So Paul, how did you choose to do that when Anderson still is in concept phase?
Mhm.
And you chose to include 120 there.
Mhm.
Superior Town Center is further down the pike, but you only included 117. Tell me the logic.
Yeah, Trustee Pennington, there's really no magic to that. What we had done previously is we were presenting to the board in prior budgets that we're only going to show here the absolute, the projects that have been approved, have entitlements, have vested rights, they've got the FDP approvals. We changed perspective a little bit as it relates to, I know the manager and the system manager and the board have had some dialogue with these other developers that seen some concept plans, and we just put in essentially the best guess. But I think where the trade-off is if in fact we aren't looking maybe at Anderson as firm of a development that potentially would be offset by some additional development in the town center that we don't have factored in. So, I don't know, Matt, Martin, if you want to add anything else, but it's not an absolute science. It's more of a little bit objective here.
For me, the impact, we're really discussing 2017,
Correct.
carrying us into 2018. So it's more important to be conservative, as Matt said you are, and I know you always are, on this budget that we're looking at for next year, the next year. And those other ones, like Anderson and stuff, are out. We're not even going to be really considering any of those yet in finance, because we haven't even looked at that budget. We're only looking at kind of a pro forma, which is a pro forma, of those years out, because we haven't funded those years yet. So,
Correct, and
yeah.
then that gives us, as you've noted, 2, 3, 4 years to,
To firm that up,
as things
yeah,
change,
right.
to modify items. And again, the other residentials include Rogers, Saharias, Discovery, again, typically out. I mean, Discovery is closer in, and we may not meet that particular time frame, but for 30 units, that's not a material budget item necessarily. On the commercial side, again, we have some Anderson development, but again, beginning in 19, and really in the marketplace, just 2 developments, which hopefully is low, or excuse me, in the town center, just 2 developments. That would be the medical office building, which, we're supposed to break ground this fall, and and then 2 additional hotels, excuse me, 1 to break ground potentially in 17 and one in 18. So
Well, again, on the town center, we don't anticipate any additional commercial in the next 5 years?
I would hope that more would come, but this model, again, conservative models reflects only that. And this is obviously subject to, debate and dialogue, but that's, other than the office and the new hotels, that's what we're modeling. Hopefully reality is something different than that. Another source of revenue, which is not critical for the town operations, is property tax. It generates about 10% of town revenues, but we just did want to note that the board controls 4 property tax rates: a town property tax rate, interchange, District 2, District 3. Between those 4, the board has been able to, since 2004, reduce those property tax rates, and I would challenge you to find any other entity that has been able to do that. We've looked for the town rate, for example. We're proposing it stay the same next year as this year, but over the last decade and a half or so, the rate has dropped by 10%. The District 2 rate, and again, District 2 and District 3 are going away after 2018, but we've been, since those districts were dissolved and the board took over authority of those operations, the debt service in District 2 has dropped by 35%, District 3 by 36%. And same sort of story in the interchange. Over the last 5 years or so, the property tax rate has dropped by 25%, helping those businesses in the marketplace. Another component of revenues
Did you have 3 in there?
I did have 3 in there. So
Can you flip through those again?
I can. So for
Yeah.
the town, we've seen, we're proposing a current rate of 7.9 mils, whatever a mil
Right.
is, which has dropped 10% from the '04 base. District 2, when we took it over, had a mill of 8. It's now down to 5.2. District 3, similar story, has dropped from 8 to 5.1. District 2 is north of McCaslin. District 3 south of McCaslin. Colton, thank you, Matt. And then the interchange district, and again, this is the non-residential, the commercial and the retail in the Superior Marketplace. That's dropped.
I'm hoping that the
25%.
reporter in the back of the room is listening to this message, because it's very important for our residents to know
I would agree.
that as other parts of the tax bill go up, the Superior component of the tax bill is going down.
That's an accurate
Okay.
story,
Correct.
and going down for 14 years straight. Another component of our revenues are fees. The only real fee increase we're looking at is Martin is proposing a new zoning verification letter fee for $25. Again, fees and rates and charges, we look at these every year. We assess them to recover costs is all we do. And in some cases, we don't even recover costs. But there is a cost associated with this, so Martin wants to implement a new fee. I did want to note for you, even though there is no increase in this, we are proposing to keep that landscape fee. Again, we assumed that when the district's dissolved in '04. That fee has generally been the same since '04, and we're proposing it be the same through 2021 at $30 a household per month. On the utility side of life, we are looking next year for increases in water and sewer at 2.5% and 5% accordingly. Over the 5-year plan, similar type of rate increase in 18, and then beginning in 19 and going through 2021, we're proposing no water rate increases and a sewer only increase at 5%. And we'll get into the level of detail with those utility operations on why we need that, but primarily as it relates to the sewer operation. We have some relatively large plan improvements that we'll need over a period of the next 4 to 10 years, but we'll jump into that. What we call an average customer, if there is such a thing, the net impact will be about $2.60 a month based on that 2.5% water, 5% sewer. This changes a little bit from what we were proposing even last year. Last year we were proposing 5% increases across the board for water and sewers for the foreseeable future, but I think the caveat that we've given you the last couple of years, that as we see additional growth to the utility system with no to marginal additional expense to the utility system, we can look at moderating some of these rate increases, and that's what we've been able to do. So last year, we were proposing 5% rate increases in water, and you'll now see the revised rate increases, 2.5% in the next couple of years, and then hopefully going away for a couple of years.
So all of those new units that you talked about in the plan, residential units, will pay this water and sewer bills to the town, and they'll participate in these increases.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this applies to any of our utility customers.
The only thing that won't probably is at $30 a month.
Correct. For
those that have their own metro districts?
No.
Do we charge the $30 to the Superior Town Center? I can't remember.
Yes,
Okay.
we do.
Okay.
The
we are.
landscape fee?
Yeah, the landscape fee.
Yeah. I mean,
Because some places don't pay the full landscape
that's
fee,
right.
or any of it in some cases,
but the majority of town, I mean, we look at those amenities that fee is paying for as regional amenities, so yes.
I agree with that.
The
I
new
think that
residents in the
it's the
town center.
town's
Yep.
amenities, everybody can participate, they're not.
Who does not pay landscape fees?
Original town does not.
And say why.
When the District 2 and District 3 were created back in the 90s, one of the components of those districts was the creation of a landscape maintenance fee to pay for these new landscaping areas within town as they were being built. So when they developed these metro districts and the boundaries of the metro districts, for whatever reason, original town was not included in the boundaries of those districts, and therefore did not pay and has not paid those monthly fees.
So Remington does not pay?
And Remington is the only other development that does not pay, because back in the day, Remington was not even, that development was not within the town of Superior. That was later annexed into the town boundaries, so that, because of that.
And Rogers
anomaly.
Farm?
The intent is that Rogers Farm will be paying,
Right.
Sagamore pays, so
Right.
all the other developments in town, but with those two anomalies, original town
Yeah.
and Remington,
I think, though, it isn't Saddlebrook half,
No.
they are.
It's
the-
20.
25?
or it's less than 30, though.
So
isn't it?
30 is a single-family home, 25 for an attached townhome product,
Okay.
and 20 for apartments.
Okay, so all the other homeowners associations within the town of Superior, outside of original town, pay either $30 for single-family or 25 for multi-unit residential.
Correct.
Townhomes, okay.
Yep,
So
And Calmonte is the same way?
Yep.
Calmonte pays $25 per month per unit?
correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
I didn't absorb the Remington exclusion. It doesn't seem, it isn't palatable to me right now. Why should I like that?
I'm not sure I'm asking you to like it. I'm just saying that.
Why should I think it's fair?
I think that's something we can discuss.
Yeah.
I mean, we have.
I would like that on the table.
We could certainly
Right.
discuss that.
I guess I can sort of semi-buy the exclusion for original town. I am a little concerned about an exclusion in perpetuity for original town, because there's a lot of landscaping that's going on, I believe a lot of dollars being spent there. But the new developments in original town, I think we should consider separately.
Okay. That may be a good discussion item for the September 12th meeting before you arrive, Trustee Pennington. The schedule calls for any pending, what we call policy-related items, we'll bring up tentatively at that September
Is
meeting.
Jeff
So we'll-
taking notes there?
Jeff has got
Okay,
it for you,
good.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Staffing changes don't begin until 2019, really, and really what's driving this is the new development to some degree in the Superior Town Center, but, we've got penciled in for Public Works Department, a new field tech, for Sergeant Chamberlain, a new sheriff's deputy. 2019, then we will add for Mr. Hammer and his operation, another field tech operation, and then potentially in 2021, a sheriff deputy. You know, and again, these are factored into the budget, the long-term financial plan, you know, obviously subject to change, but I think the story is here, over the next couple of years, we are proposing no staffing changes. Quick summary on debt, because it's, you know, it impacts all the operations, but we've been very aggressively paying down outstanding debt. Next year is no exception. We're going to, in 2017, pay down principal of about a little less than $5 million. As I've already mentioned, 2 and 3, districts 2 and 3 will continue to pay their debt until 2018, and then that goes away, and that property tax rate of 5 mils, which is about 5% of those homeowners' property tax bill, that will go away entirely.
Paul, what is that debt specifically for?
So when the districts were created and the service plans were approved, and within those service plans, the debt was to pay for road infrastructure, parks, trails, things of that nature.
Okay. On several occasions, we'd spoken about paying off the debt for the utilities with the revenue that was generated from the one-time fees, several $1 million at Town Center. But we still see that we're paying through 2021 on the town's water, sewer, and drainage. Are we still not considering eliminating that debt sooner with the revenues generated from Town Center?
I think we are, and really trusting Hanson. It really speaks to we are being, again, conservative, perhaps too conservative as it relates to the development across the road, only 117 units over 5 years, a couple of new buildings over 5 years. But I think realistically, similar to the discussion we had last year and the year before, that as development continues, we will be able to moderate utility rate increases. No, we are definitely looking at that as new growth, new additions we have to the utility system happen. Yes, that is definitely an option to pay off that debt early. And we'll have to evaluate. We may have additional needs. I mean, right now the average interest rate on that particular debt is less than 2%. So, you know, I hate to use this term, but, you know, we're starting to talk about, well, we got free or close to free money, so we may want to evaluate. But yes, that's definitely an option we will want you to continue to look at as those revenues start to roll in. But it won't be for several years.
Okay.
And then we talked a little bit about the urban renewal area over in the marketplace, and again, that's the SURA, or Superior Urban Renewal Authority. That the formal debt there of about $1 million a year will go away after 2019, and then the additional obligations will be paid off by 2021, and then, you know, hopefully freeing up that $2.5 million for, you know, potentially other uses as the board at that time deems appropriate, you know, within the town. Again, a good story. This is a takeaway. Don't get too worked up about it, but this just shows since our peak of debt, which was 06 after we issued the open space debt, about $71 million, we've made some really aggressive payments and refundings of outstanding debt, and we're getting it down to, you know, at the end of next budget year, down to $33 million with the existing debt.
That slide is exceedingly important to tell the story of the financial management of this town. I would actually like something, I'd like to see that slide and some commentary, perhaps the mayor's letter, in a upcoming Superior Sentinel, because it's a wonderful slide.
And that would be kind of a good context as it relates to, you know, reminding people that we're reviewing the budget.
Along with the declining property tax component.
Yeah, we've got several pieces of good news
Good.
in this, yeah.
Now, having said that, there are some components. There's always the but there, huh? Within the budget, and we'll go into this when we talk about the project, but we right now still have some additional debt planned for town hall expansion. We continue to talk about the Windy Gap firming project, and I know it may sound like I think Trustee Gregores has the tenure here with Trustee Sorelli on the Planning Commission. We've been talking about this for a decade. This is firming up our long-term water supply, building a storage vessel with 12 other entities up by Bertha, Colorado. Our share of this project is roughly $20 million. We've got about half of that in the bank. Our oversight authority, Northern Colorado Water, is beginning the design process for this reservoir. Beginning potentially this year, but next year in the 2018, and then we will look at construction as early as 2018. I mean, between us, this is being broadcast. 2018 may be a little bit aggressive, but again, it may be early by a year or two. But let's plan for issuing that debt in 18. If it doesn't work out, then we'll issue it in 19.
So we haven't paid any money yet, but we've collected money and we have it in the bank.
For
the Windy Gap firming, I'm sorry.
we
We
have
paid some engineering. or
right. We've
something,
paid
right?
some
Yeah.
preliminary, studies, designs, getting the approval from the federal government, from the state government. So we've paid
We paid significant amount.
maybe $1 million, or over $1 million over the last several years. Well, probably $2 million. And we'll go through this when Alex talks about it. But I think next year, for example, so we had a payment of $800,000 this year. There'll be a like payment next year. That's for our design portion of this particular
Okay,
project.
that's what I thought I
But the big
remembered.
money's to
The
come
big
in
money's to come.
18, 19.
And
Okay.
what's the proposed schedule of payment for that 10.5 million? Over how many years?
So we have that at least structured right now, and we're working with our financing partners to pay that over 20 years for both the town hall expansion as well as another capital project in here that we'll talk about, the North Pool expansion. Both of those are assuming 10-year paybacks. And obviously, much more on those two projects to come, but just kind of giving you an oversight. So there's a quick summary for you. And then I think the next steps are to, start to drill into the actual budget document. Unless you have any questions, we'll go ahead and jump into that then.
So, on Windy Gap, are we accruing money into an account for that 10.5 million? Or is that all going to be a bond or whatever?
That 10.5 million number you saw there right now is our most conservative estimate for new bonding requirements.
Okay.
So again, the project, we're going to owe another $20 million. We've got $9.5 million in the bank right
Right.
now. We'll need to finance the other $10.5 million unless, I'll follow up on the trustee Hansen comment, unless we start to get significant tap fee revenues, then we can start evaluating, well, how do we want to use those revenues? Do we want to pay
Right.
down existing debt? Do we maybe want to minimize our new debt service?
Right.
So we'll have that
Yeah,
discussion.
I just wanted out there that we have a chunk in the bank.
Correct. That would be accurate.
Paul, are we going to address the general fund surplus for the year at any time, or did we already discuss that?
We have not discussed it. Yes, so maybe an appropriate time, is this for 2016 surplus, 2017 surplus?
2016.
So let's talk about that maybe if this makes sense, as we talk about the budget itself, because a big component of the budget is not only looking into the future, but we need to, look at our base, look at what's happening in 2016. So if you're okay with that, Trustee Hansen, let's talk about it
Yeah.
within the next 5 or 10 minutes here.
Sure.
Okay, which pieces are we going to go through next?
So what we will do is so the budget materials that I think you got almost 4 weeks ago, August 1st, the primary budget document, and I know it's maybe difficult to grind through, is the Excel, the landscape Excel document. So what we've done in prior years, we won't go line by line, but we'll just give you general snapshots and go through that particular document, starting, as the manager said, with the revenues. So we have gone through through this assumption presentation a lot of these particular revenues. You'll see that the sales tax, the property tax rates are staying the same, and I don't want to be disingenuous here, but we've got two property taxes. We've got a town property tax rate of 7.93 mils, and then we have that additional property tax rate with the voters approved several years ago for the contribution of 1.5 mils for the city of Louisville Library. So no changes there. You'll see that, this absent really any new material growth, the property tax revenues generated from these property tax rates are pretty consistent, but then you'll see every 2 years a bump in those revenues, and those are the revaluation years by Boulder County. And you'll remember kind of famously last year, Jeff, go back to 15, where we had that revaluation of 15 to 20%. So that generated for us, instead of $1.3 million, up to $1.5 million. So those are factored into the out years. And again, we try to be a little bit conservative as it relates to that. So, the first part of these taxes are property taxes, and specific ownership is essentially property tax on a vehicle. The sales tax numbers we talked about, those are broken down into these particular categories. We have sales tax coming from different areas within town that Jeff needs to account for differently. So we have sales tax generated in areas not within the Superior Marketplace, so that's the sales non-SURA. That represents about 25% of the sales tax revenue in town. That's coming primarily from the Safeway marketplace and the ancillary retail down in that particular area. Why we have to separate that is, the town gets essentially 100% of that particular revenue, where the sales tax generated within the marketplace, which is a big chunk of the revenue there, is split between the town district, the utility district, and the urban renewal authority. And then we have a new revenue line here that really was relatively immaterial in past years, but we need to start accounting for it, and we'll kind of walk through how this works. But we also are generating sales tax in what we call the Louisville revenue share area, and again, this is the 80 acres on the north side of the Superior Town Center parcel. And in past years, we were sharing revenue with Louisville. It was only revenue generated from the temporary ICE facility. They had some vending machines over there, so we'd send them a check every year of $100 or $200. Well, that's going to change here pretty soon. What you'll see here is total revenue being generated within that particular area, and then you'll see further down in the document, half of this number is actually being remitted back to the city of Louisville. And really where you start to see the bigger spikes of $100,000, $200,000 a year, those correspond to the hotels actually coming online, because hotel rooms are taxed.
That was going to be my question. So how much of the tax, I don't mean 50%, what kind, any tax that's applied to a hotel room in Superior in that area, well, it's all in, our hotels will only be in the town center in that area, that tax sharing area. Any taxes applied, like a room tax or a lodging tax, or half of it will go to Louisville? Is that what you're assuming?
We're assuming that there will be our 3.46% sales tax rate applied to a room, and then in addition to that, and that will be shared with the city of Louisville, most of that. And then on top of that, we have something else known as a hotel occupancy fee. That will not be shared.
Okay, like a $10 fee or something?
It's $4 per night.
$4? Okay, so that one, because when you get your hotel bill in any town, you get like 5 different or 6 different taxes.
Right.
And they have a lodging fee, or room tax and fee and all that. Okay.
So-
So it's strictly only our 3-something% sales tax.
Right. And technically, I don't want to lead you astray, our total sales tax rate is 3.46%. The revenue share agreement with Louisville is we will share non-dedicated sales tax revenues. So we have dedicated sales tax revenues for CIP, for open space, for the interchange district. So we will be sharing then the non-dedicated rate, or 2.7% with them.
Okay, so now when you give them that check, you don't have to buy them lunch anymore. They're going to have to buy you lunch.
Lunch and dinner maybe, huh?
But what is repeat the commitment we have to Louisville for that? What's the total commitment? How does that read?
For the sales tax sharing, that generally identifies an area of land over there, I think is generally identified as the old BLM Mankit properties. But it identifies that any non-dedicated sales tax generation over there, so the base of 2.7%, will be shared 50% with the city of Louisville in perpetuity. Did I get that right?
Right. And they are in sync that sales tax on hotel rooms meets that requirement. At one point, there was some discussion that it was actually on retail sales tax generation. Are they in sync? Have we discussed this issue with them?
Boy, I think my finance colleague over there is in sync.
Yeah, and I've had numerous discussions with the city manager over there, and the previous mayor and myself met with their mayor and city manager, and we were all in agreement. So.
Okay.
And again, what Trustee Pennington, as you all recognize, is identified is there's a requirement in the agreement that we have so much square footage of retail generating space over there. And yes,
And
the
this
hotels
counts towards that.
counts towards that.
Okay.
At least the director of finance in Louisville has told me he
Well,
feels
I'm
that.
talking here on line 13, library property tax. Last year at this time, we talked about the fact that given increasing property values, actually that component is looking to increase dramatically over time from, you have 249 in 2015, it was 242.5 in 2011, and it's projected, by 2021 to go to 321, which, we're butting up against a very significant increase over time. So we actually talked about discussing with them capping that at some level. Have we had those conversations?
At our last joint issues committee, we brought it up, told them that we thought we were going to need to start looking at revising the IGA.
Right.
To help support services over here at some point when they go in the town
Right.
center. So, yeah.
Because the fact is, a lot of that increase is solely property tax. It's not increased use. It's no increased demand on
Right,
their
yeah.
services. And it's simply, this is why I can't stress enough, when we write the language for a referendum, that cap should have been built not to exceed X number of dollars a year, and it didn't. So this is why, our wording is very important when we write that language such as that.
And I'll add to that now that I'm on the library board. When I met, next week there's another library board meeting, Louisville Library Board meeting, next Thursday, I think it is, which is a public meeting too, in the Louisville Library. Anybody can attend. And we're looking for people that would want to be on the library board. But the thing that I mentioned at our last meeting 2 months ago was that we in Superior are looking at expanded services here from Louisville. Louisville bringing their library services over here, and we need to talk about that as we move forward. How would we modify to actually bring a little mini library over to Superior? And right now, the people that are using the library are almost entirely young families and very young children, pre-kindergarten children. So then we think about, for our $300,000, how do we get services actually located in Superior? So an extension of the Louisville Library to come over here. So as you think about rewriting that IGA, don't just automatically think about capping it or changing it so significantly. It's really, how do we get the services that they provide in Louisville actually brought over here on a rotating or a traveling exhibit or something like that. I don't know what it is. It's a concept idea, and I think we need to absolutely keep that on top of the burner to get them to bring something over
Yeah,
here.
if I can frame that just a little differently, Rita, there is potential as we add library services over here that we recognize that the biggest need is young families and preschool age children, and we might actually have sort of that children's reading room over here that we fund that we build, because that is a huge gathering opportunity for our young families here. If we supply those services over here, the only logical extension here is that those young families would have less need of them at all in Louisville. So I agree with you. We've got to think about all that, because if we end up providing those services, and I think 80% of the usage is young families.
It's more like 95% of the usage. And that's another way to look at it. I'm saying that if we keep it the way it is now, they need to bring those services over here. If we provide the services ourselves, then we really need to look at changing that and changing how that money flows and whether we leave it within the town. So
And
there's
we
two
do
scenarios
have
that we
the
could look at. How do we
have the
serve the
flexibility,
users? Yeah.
as it is written, to revisit
Right.
that partnership.
But
So-
and if we don't choose in the near term to change it, then they have to bring those services here to this town.
I mean, they're expecting adjustments to be made. I mean, we're pretty transparent in our meetings with them that.
Now, they're not opposed to any of these discussions.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
well, there's not much they can do about it. I mean, obviously, it's our town, and clearly, we're going to have some kind of library service within our town. They know that. I think they've accepted that. The only question is to what degree and what is the impact on.
Right, and whether they provide it or whether we provide it on our own without
Right.
involvement of them. And so those are two different scenarios, two different paths that we can look at, and we need to modify the IGA, if we do modify it, to choose the correct path, or the best path. I don't know, there's no correct path. It's the best path for our residents. And it might be we do both, we choose both paths, which is we provide something and they, in order to fulfill their obligation, bring something over here as well.
I'd like to add to that list to continue to look at a 24-hour book drop solution here in town. I mean, most libraries have a 24-hour book drop option, and I know they're concerned about stray things being put in there in the middle of the night, but I'm just not buying that that's a huge risk, and I think it would be a huge benefit to our residents that maybe can't get down here 9 to 5 to drop off books. If they could come down after hours or could come on the weekends, I think that, having the book drop here in the first place was a huge step in the right direction, but I think it would be very little effort to extend that convenience to a 24-hour solution, and it would really help residents.
Agreed, and we can be creative in it. Part of it was having it outside in the elements, where if it's full, people then stack books next to it or whatnot, but we can investigate putting it in like Safeway, if Safeway would cooperate, or we can figure out how to cover it, over the overhang over here, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it should absolutely. In that vein, can we have, for additional information, we track how many books are, how much usage that book drop has. So can we get the numbers on that?
If we, as we move forward with the discussions of the town hall edition, I would suggest that maybe we build it into that.
That's
where
a
there's
great
built-in
point.
Book drop.
It's a great
It's just
point.
like the one at the Louisville Library.
That's a great point, yeah.
So the non-policy related follow-up that we have, Trustee Pennington's question in particular as it relates to, number of book drops, there'll be a number of those questions that arise today, and we will take note of those and get all those back to you as well, obviously. The only other item I wanted to note under taxes, and we've talked about this already, is at line 22, building use tax. This is one of the lines you'll see that'll spike dramatically because of new construction activity. So that's part of that $19 million number over five years. So you'll see that increase as new construction activity continues in town. Then down to license and permits. And again, what we'll do for both revenues and expenses, staff will just highlight what we feel are kind of the critical components. If the board has any other questions or inquiries, obviously we'll address it or get back to you on it. Similar to the building use tax, line 34, our plan check and permit fees. This is for Ernie Kern to take the plans, review them, do the inspections, and there's a fee associated with that. So again, that number is increasing dramatically because of construction activity. Now you'll see the offset to that. We'll have additional expenses for Ernie and his staff to do that particular work. Charges for services here, I don't think there are really any material items. I mean, the biggest line here is something we call the administrative fee. So all town staff is budgeted in the general fund. Now, what we will do is we will recognize that a portion of Alex's time and his staff's time is used to run and operate and manage the utility operation. So what we will do is we take a portion of staff's time that is budgeted in the general fund and recover a component of that in the utility operation, in the interchange operation, and even in the landscape fee. So this is reimbursement to the general fund for staff's time working within those other operations.
Paul, question probably for Patrick, and it's really not material at all, but it has to do with the tennis facility rental that's going down 50%. I mean, it's really not much, but a few years ago, we had some significant discussions about the tennis facility and who was leading it, and now it appears that we're not using that as much. Is there something going on with tennis in the town?
Yeah, to answer your question, the YMCA is only going to pay for the 5 to 6 months that they're going to use the courts, and then just kick those back to the town the other 6 months. So they were being charged $833 a month throughout the 12 months, but they were only using the courts for half. So that's what that decrease in the number shows.
Okay, so is tennis usage up, or is it down, or kind of flat?
Tennis usage is up. I would say the YMCA programs for youth is up, but programming in general for adults and teens is probably down a little bit.
Okay.
So they're really only focusing on the youth component of providing tennis.
Okay, thanks.
And then the additional item, which Jeff has highlighted there, line 55, and I don't know when a good time to start talking about this, but one option we're looking in the 2017 budget is covering the north pool. There would be some capital expense with that. There would be some new operating expenses, and then additionally there would be some new operating revenues. So that's what the intent of this line is, to capture new operating revenues, assuming that structure gets built halfway through next year, and we start to program and charge for those particular expenses.
Before we go to a new one, I want to go back to license and permits. Matt, I had talked to you about building permits to remedy structural issues. Is this the proper place to discuss that?
Yeah.
So if you look at line item 34 on the first page of this document, unfortunately, I personally became aware of what I think is something certainly we need discussion on. When a homeowner has to deal with structural issues, as we know, those can run up to several $100,000. The value of your property is decreased by that amount. So if you bought a house at $600,000 and you have a couple $100,000 of structural repairs, you can't sell that house for $600,000. You have to sell it for $400,000 or $350,000 or whatever. And so when you try to fix those structural problems, under the current law, under our current policy, you've got to get a building permit for that, and you have to pay permit fees, and those can range, they can be pretty substantial. The issue I would like this board or the new board to tackle, I have no problems paying building permit fees when I'm adding value. If I'm adding a sun porch, or I'm adding a bedroom, or I'm adding value to my house. But when you're restoring value to your house, you have in essence already paid that permit fee on the original construction. You then pay it again on the remedy. And in my personal case, no inspection was needed. So no cost was incurred by the town, but I had to pay the town a significant amount, I mean, in the thousands. So,
Yeah, you raised a question I had, and that was cost. So was some cost involved in reviewing the plans, or, I mean, I can understand at least recovering whatever
right.
cost.
I have no problem with recovering any fee for that, but on my personal case, well, the language as written says the town assumes that a certain percentage of your submission is taxable. That you can tax materials, but you don't tax labor. In my case, had I not read the letter down to the finest detail and had my structural repair company submit that, 80% of it was labor, or 85% of it was labor, and document that only 15 was materials, I would have paid $3,000 more than I ended up paying. And so we know several things. We know we have a problem with structural issues. And what we also know is that going forward, there are no warranties left on structural issues. So homeowners will pay for these structural remedies out of their own pockets. And I just would like us to analyze it. I had talked to Matt on an ongoing basis about this. I'd like to know the impact on revenues of a policy that if you're restoring value because of structural issues, such and such applies. And of course, if you're adding value, obviously the current plan applies to that addition of value. So I'd like to see it studied and for us to know that this is occurring, because frankly, it is huge salt in the wound when you're facing this issue. And in the case of our particular area, while the town has no legal liability for these problems, there is that burden we have as town board members to make sure we authorize residential development and hold our developers to the fire in terms of, is this an appropriate place to build? Have you tested the soils? Have you tested the water aquifer beneath the property? Is it buildable, and will our residents likely have no problems with those elements of the building? So anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there. I think it's definitely worth investigating.
I'm a little concerned about where you draw the line on something like that, though, because you could make a similar argument when you're talking about sewer lines. We've had sewer line issues due to expansive soils, and people can argue it was caused by different ways. So there, hail damaged roofs. I mean, that's not an improvement. That's it's a recovery
Right.
from an event. So it could be argued, for a lot of conditions. So I'm just concerned about.
Yeah, I think
about
that is part of the conundrum. But I will tell you that the repair of a sewer line and the repair of a roof is so much less in order of magnitude of a structural repair. These structural repairs are running into $200,000 and $300,000 in my neighborhood. And that is a huge chunk of change. So when we apply the standard percentage to that, especially if we assume, as I think the code does, that 50% of that cost is materials, you get into a huge chunk of change. I'm just asking it be investigated, that we are aware of it, and we make a rational decision based on how the data fall, rather than,
Well, you brought up a good point about labor versus materials, and I do think that's definitely significant, and that's
Right.
something that maybe the building department could be helping people to say, hey, this is, or contractors should be,
Right.
better
But
educated.
it is a unique
yeah.
problem this community has that a lot of
Yep.
communities never will have to tackle. So I just would like us to understand it and make a rational decision.
Now, I'll just add one comment to it. I think if we apply it based on, just as you said, about you only tax the materials, because what happens then is the contractor takes that building permit and doesn't have to pay tax when they go buy their product or they get it wholesale. So that's the only way the town gets the sales tax generated on the materials themselves, the wood, the new beams underneath, or and the roofing material and all that kind of stuff. But what happens is homeowners don't recognize that there has to be a clear definition or delineation between what's actually taxable, sales taxable, and what isn't. So what gets paid is based on the review of the plan per the town codes, and then based on the materials that the general contractor won't be paying sales tax on. The sales tax gets paid by you, by the homeowner. And I know even when I built my house a long time ago, that was just something I came in here personally because I was a general contractor, and we sat down and I went through it wasn't just a 50-50 split. It was clear I had down to the penny how much was going to be on materials that are taxable. So I think that's what we have to do, is be more cognizant of what's materials that is usually sales taxed, that goes into the building permit, but nothing else goes in there other than maybe a fee to review it to make sure that it's correct. And we should help our residents be able to do that. We had a lot of roofs replaced in the last 3 years, and hopefully it's easier, I think, on a roof because it's pretty clear what's labor versus what's associated with material. You can't not charge a building permit because, again, the sales tax doesn't get paid usually if you don't, that's how the sales tax gets paid in the case of a construction, is that it goes through the building permit and not from the contractor.
So I hope somebody added it to the to-do list to think about this. Okay, good.
And then there is one more item under charges for services. I want to note, and we'd already talked about this, but we have a new line, and it's going to be materially in the out years as it relates to that hotel occupancy fee, or essentially $4 a night for those hotel rooms. Then very quickly on the other revenue, I'm sorry, Trustee Sorelli?
I wanted to go back to the North Pool anticipation of revenues, since would be a new source if we did put the cap on. What's that number coming from?
As to the number that you see there for
Yes,
revenue
right.
is, we were working to come up with about a 50% cost recovery of operations. Operations on an annual basis is going to be projected around $500,000. So it would be increased fees for households to use the pool,
Okay.
either in the form of a lump sum one-time fee or bringing our pool fees closer to what other recreational amenities charge, increasing our fees for swim team usage, bumping our fees for our aquatics programming, and then for rentals as well, if a meet was to be hosted or if somebody wanted to host a birthday party. So combining all those together to shoot for a 50% cost recovery goal.
Now, Patrick, is that only new usage? So in other words, fall, winter, spring, or just across the board?
That would be across the board. We're looking at a completely new pricing model that would, generate something a little bit more ongoing on an annual basis.
Okay.
So if you want to use, today if you use the North Pool and you're a resident, you don't pay anything.
Correct.
But now you're saying in the future, if this was to go forward, everybody'd have to pay to use the North Pool.
Correct.
Pay to use all the pools.
You would
No,
pay to
the
use-
North
you-
Pool.
we've looked at a fee where you would pay a flat fee for access to both swimming pools.
Okay.
And
In addition to
In
what they already
addition-
pay through taxes
Correct.
and landscaping
Yep.
fees and all.
It would be fairly consistent with how you would see it at, Louisville Rec Center or my neck of the woods over at the City of Thornton, where you could pay a monthly charge or the opportunity to pay a one-time flat fee for a couple hundred dollars.
Okay, we need to be very clear about that as we have this discussion.
big
You know,
Okay,
because
sure.
no one's expecting that they're, that are currently residents are going to have to pay in order to use this potentially new facility, and I think we have to be very clear about
What's any
that.
facility, though? It's at either of the pools.
But it's as a result of adding the
Yeah.
cover to this
Right. So
pool.
is
That's the
that-
reason.
Are
why-
you, that's set in stone, or is that something we're
No,
going to
it's a
discuss?
policy
more?
decision.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're definitely, hopefully it's not based on the number of users of the pools now, because it's going to go down, the number of users when you put in the fee. So, I don't know, that's one of the nice things about Rock Creek, is that we have those nice pools that, although it's limited because of the flyers that use it on certain Saturdays, but it's the nice thing that you can just go to the pool and use it any time and not have to worry about paying $5 a visit or $20 a visit or whatever.
And you can bring guests with you, and that's a small fee, and I've never had a problem paying for
Yes.
bringing guests from outside of
I
Superior.
agree with that, but charging residents, I don't know,
It's a big policy decision.
I am going to go into the philosophical world here. I am really troubled by including either expenditures or revenues for a policy decision and what should be a very process-oriented decision in the budget before we've gone down a significant chunk of that path. And so I would like to put a big, fat, red asterisk by this one. I'm happy to defer that discussion until we're into the expense component of this. But, I've been on this board now going on 6.5 years. And there always seems to be the short-term memory of this being a place filler, a placeholder, versus we budgeted for it. And I have no intention to get into the same muck and mire with this one that we got in with the town hall expansion.
So,
So I want process
this is,
to
think of
lead.
this as a planning document. This is something we do for a lot of projects. Parks, new parks, we put them in the budget. We have to budget for new expenses for maintenance and those type of things. So, I mean, it's nothing different here with this project than we have done with any other project. As far as
Yeah.
and you have to plan for it. And then the board can decide if you want to move forward with it or not. And if you decide not to move forward with it, we take it out.
Right.
And if you decide to move forward with it, we have it.
I agree with you
And we can-
hypothetically, Matt.
yeah.
But I also know that in practice, that doesn't always happen. And that we fast forward on some things because it was approved in the budget. Some of us think it was approved simply as a placeholder, and others think it was approved as a project because when the budget is approved. So that is a human thing we have to deal with up here. And in the case of this North Pool, I am firmly in the camp that it's got to follow a process before we make the decision as to whether or not to proceed. And I have no problem having that process occur from now into 2017 and us putting these numbers in the budget in 2017's process for 2018. But I do have a problem with it being built in here if it means we are saying no process will occur.
Matt, I agree with you. You got to have something in a budget, so it's kind of it's a map to where we want to go. But I also agree with Sandy. There's a difference between revenue and expenses, of course. This is a revenue generator that we could be depending on that revenue coming in, but an expense If it's park maintenance, we could say, well, we don't have the money in the budget to take care of this component of the parks this year. We're going to move it out. So we're not as necessarily dependent on that expense as we are on the revenue. So
I mean, this revenue is less than the expense. You know, so if we don't have the expense, what I'm saying is.
well, the
we
expense
have-
for pools, though, is, I mean, that's going to be there regardless.
Yeah, that's in our budget anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if, let's say the project gets eliminated or moves out into a future year, the expenses that would drop out of the budget are significant to where
Okay.
the revenue loss wouldn't have an impact. to
Yeah, I
us.
think Patrick said it was $500,000 additional expense for the North Pool with the cover.
Yes.
And so
Got
half
that.
of it would come back.
Got that.
They're doing an assumption that half of it. I think, for me, it's just that when we have the discussion of whether to leave it in or move it out further beyond this or take it out altogether, we need to be clear that what's in here now is an increase in fees for residents to use the North Pool.
Got it.
And I just want to make sure that we're clear about that's what we're suggesting here.
Yeah, I got it.
No, that's a big change, and I want to explore that fully and see what that means, because that may not be palatable to those that think, oh, I'll just get a new amenity for free. Well, things, unfortunately, are not free, but, you know.
I'd just like to add my agreement with Trustee Pennington's position. Right now, we've already had the discussion that we approached the town center expansion as it was in the budget. We talked about it in the budget, and we have to have a process here, and I'm reluctant to even have an assumption that we're going to do this in 2017. Particularly when in 2 months you're going to have a new board, and it's a weakness in our process when we inevitably we're going to say sometime this was in our budget. It just happens, and when we decide to do it, and people are going to say what, and so we have to have some kind of process before this pool goes forward, before this cover goes forward. So.
But I think those discussions need to happen. We don't need to wait until 2018. I think we can have this discussion sooner rather than later. Go through the process, but we don't have to keep deferring it and kicking the can down the line. I mean, there's definitely a need and a demand for, people would love to have an opportunity to swim year-round in this town.
It's a little bit like, it's not quite like school taxes. Not everybody goes to the pool, not everybody swims,
No, and I know, and the idea of maybe raising the fees for everybody, that's a whole different discussion. I'm not saying we shouldn't have the discussion. I'm saying let's have the discussion, but do it sooner rather than later.
Well, and my concern, too, is we did the indoor survey, we got great results there, and then we've managed to implement nothing that was called out in that.
I
And-
have to say, I take strong issue with that statement. I saw it in the email yesterday. I think it's strong issue. The action we deferred was putting it on as a referendum on this year's ballot. There is we did not say no to an indoor rec center. We said no to having the referendum on the ballot in 2016, which I think is the prudent course, because we want our residents to feel the impact of the Rocky Mountain levy and the Boulder Valley School District levy, to understand what those non-Town of Superior impacts are on their tax bill before we thrust the potential impact of a rec center mill levy increase. And I stand by that decision, but in no way, shape, or form, I thought that survey was probably one of the best process-driven things we've done as a board. It yielded excellent information. One of the chief things was indoor aquatic facilities, and frankly, we've got to get back to grappling with that, because at the the expenditures we're talking about now for a covered facility, we're into serious range. And so that opens up that discussion, and ProStack has told us they stand ready to do the next step. We just need to tell them. We need to authorize that next step. And ProStack has not yet been involved, I believe, at all in this pool cover thing. And that's why ProStack is around. This is a major, major deal. We're talking about, we had a 5-year process on the park, El Dorado School parcel, which is $3 million. And so far on a similarly priced amenity, we've had no public process except for a survey that none of us has seen. And certainly the board did not authorize. So I stand behind that indoor survey, and I stand ready to move forward on it. So that's why I
But move forward
disagree.
on what? I mean, I agreed also with postponing the decision to put something on the ballot this year. But I think that also probably means next year and the year beyond. I mean, these things don't just, it's probably multiple years out. And my point is, we could do, if we collectively want to do something simple and do it sooner rather than later with this pool cover, we could provide indoor aquatics sooner rather than later, or we could continue to talk about it for the next several years, which it sounds like the majority of the board wants to do.
No, you can't just leap to a conclusion that the majority of the board wants to do anything. What we're saying is we're starting to talk about this, whether it makes sense. And it may take us 2 or 3 years to do it. It's not kicking the can down the road. It's following a community process of, and community government takes a long time. I want to go back to and remind everybody, though, why the survey was done. The indoor space survey was done because of the community space we were contemplating putting into the town center. It had nothing to do, it was not driven by, I should say, it was not driven by the town building a separate space somewhere. It was driven by what kind of things would we put into the community space that we were committing to in the town center. Some 20 to 40,000 square feet. And we've committed that we're going to build out 20 to 40,000 community space within the town center. That's why we did the survey. It wasn't because somebody wanted to have an indoor rec center built someplace at $25 million, which is what Louisville is putting on the ballot this year. It was, we're going to have this opportunity to have this space in the town center. What do our residents?
No, that wasn't.
Yeah,
because
I don't agree with that.
That survey was not done to determine
just-
what's going to go in the town center. It was to determine what indoor needs do we want somewhere in town.
Right.
Then.
But it was as a result of, at that time, we also had the commitment that we could do it in the town center. We could do something in the town center, so everybody said, let's use that survey results.
The
in
survey
order
was
to-
independent of that, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it
was
You're almost making it
independent.
sound like, because of the town center, let's do the survey. I think you
No,
got that's
yeah,
backwards.
the
The
first-
survey came
the first-
first, and that was one of the options. We have other options for
In my
a rec
mind, a
center.
big piece of the survey was, is the town ready to fund a rec center? And
Well, I think there's
And
a
I-
lot of, that we have a various difference of opinion here. I think everybody has a different view of
I
what
think
that
you're all
survey
right.
was. Yeah.
There are catalysts to prompt us to think of these things, and certainly the town center discussion was a catalyst. Certainly, then impact came forward. Yeah, well, impact actually came after. But there are catalysts that get us thinking and going down a path. And I think it was multiple things that were hitting us at that time. So I think you're all right.
But honestly, for us to even begin to contemplate having an actual rec center, state-of-the-art, 25 million, whatever the case may be, maybe not here, but maybe we have another property. Realistically speaking, that's not going to happen for at least 5 years. And I'm being optimistic. So in the meantime, I think what the mayor is trying to say, in the meantime, do we want to wait 3 or 4 more years to put a bubble over the North Pool, or can we?
Well, we're not
have this
waiting, we're going to have that
discussion
discussion now as to
Yeah.
whether or not to have it as a placeholder or what we would do. And I go back to, and I could probably, if we had to, We originally started talking about $1 million to put a bubble over that pool, and now we're up to over 3.
Right.
And that's a concern for me, that we start out projects, and it's not because of time lapse, it's because we
more.
expand the concept or the vision of what it's going to be. We originally talked about, and years ago when it was brought up on this board, years ago when I was sat out there as a resident, it was, like $1 million, and even more recently, it was $1 million, and now we're 3 times that. So we need to have that discussion and make a decision.
And by the way, just so we're clear and I know we're on the air, ProStack has never unduly delayed anything that the town has wanted to do. So I see you guys as true partners, and we need to have the discussion with you. I don't think you will hold it hostage and do your due diligence. Is going to take 2 or 3 years. So I don't believe that. I think we need to include you, but I don't want it to have it be somewhere in the vague future, 2018 and all that. Why can't we have this discussion this year or early next year?
We're going to have it now with this budget thing.
Okay.
The thing will be whether we leave it in the 17, move it out 18 or 19, or take it out altogether. That's what we have to decide. We have 3 options.
Yes.
Right.
Leave it in, move it out, take it out.
I say
That's it.
there's nothing wrong with leaving it in
Yes.
there as a
Yeah.
placeholder, as long as we agree that there's going to be good community involvement in deciding whether this is going to happen. I agree that $3 million I think that's a lot to swallow. But if we're going to go back to the survey and say residents requested, that was one of the top items, well, there's a big difference between putting a bubble over a pool
Right.
and having a
indoor
full rec
aquatic center. That's
Right.
right.
But that being said, let's leave it in the budget.
Right.
And let's have the discussion with the residents, see if they want to spend $3 million on a bubble.
Right.
Well, and I fully support having ProStack be involved on this moving forward. I never wanted to short-circuit any of that process. And I think to your question about how did it get from $1 million to 3, I think the difference is a bubble in the true sense, a inflatable plastic type bubble can be accomplished for a lot less. It's aesthetically not very pleasing. There's poor air quality, and I think we kind of put that on the back burner for those reasons. I think if we're going to do something in this community, we do things. We should do things right, and I think doing a bubble would just. I think that would be a disservice to the process. I think if we're going to spend any money, we spend it and do it right, and a retractable roof, something that looks good, something that functions good. That to me is the only way to go on this.
Well, but let's think bigger picture, though. If we wanted to do it right, I think the right way, and this is a difference of opinion, I think the right way is to build a full rec center with an indoor pool, and in the interim, let's work out a deal with Louisville so residents can go over there and use their indoor pool. But again, we go back to the community and say, is this something that you're interested in, and at what level, how much would you spend on this? And if the residents, by and large, say, I have no problem with $3 million with a retractable bubble, I think that's great. But
Well, it's a
It's gotta go through that
it's a
process.
multifaceted situation. Impact on a residential community, adequacy of parking, adequacy of deck space, when you start putting a retractable roof over. What are the options for sharing this? We talked at some point about approaching Louisville about some sort of indoor aquatic facility, and then they raised the issue of redoing Louisville Rec and expanding some of that. So we've got lots of balls in the air, lots of things that we need to tackle. And then there was the extra element that came forth this summer that we're pretty full capacity at both outdoor pools right now. And so this is a situation that really demands thoughtful process, identification of all the variables, and, my instincts are along Chris's instincts that there is going to come a time when we have to have this referendum out there, and it's either approved or it's defeated, but we let our residents vote via, a November election on how we want to proceed. And it's not chump change at $3 million to throw at it. And so I just say we've got to be serious.
And by the way, the referendum not putting in it for this year is the correct decision. There's no question about it, because it gets too muddled with all the other things and too many costs. And that would not be in our best interest to have it. But that doesn't mean we have to push it down several years. We can put it next year, or we can make it a priority and say we want this to be the number one priority if we're going to have a referendum for 2017. Because it's still going to take 3 or 4 or 5 years. I mean, but let's start that process if we're interested in having something significant here.
But going back to a comment Chris made, we do everything else conservatively. So I have no problem taking out this proposed revenue thing and leaving in the potential expense, because basically we are covering our potential liability and not offsetting it with a policy question that's going to be really, really serious. And so
based on the discussion we've heard, I think staff's recommendation is that you move expenses and revenue out to at least 2018 if you're
at
going to
a
have this
minimum,
process.
I would say.
I mean,
To me, at a minimum, that's a good one.
That's our recommendation.
Okay, we're about halfway in. Want to take a 5-10 minute break?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Then we can start expenses.
Okay.
It's like, I know, I've heard this for some reason. And the whole thing was, so I guess it is part of the whole thing, but having outdoor amenities and all that stuff really muddle the whole thing. I think the surveys, actually, the results are useless. To me, they're useless because there's so much data that we're trying to interpret.
It's a big policy decision.
Yeah. Well, we should probably go back to that survey and the results, and maybe that's a whole nother meeting with pro staff, is just really interpret and just take a section of it and focus on that. The survey results?
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, it's 45 pages, so I didn't really get a chance to review all the comments. The comments are the other thing.
Right.
So we're kind of saying, wait a minute,
Yeah.
why did you couldn't catch this? Now, when you put the second choice, then
Yeah. See, there's ways that you can look at that and manipulate the results, and I don't like that. It's not real clear. But I agree, it's a good point, that if we're gonna have this discussion, let's really be aware of the main purpose for this survey, and then let's see what the primary results were.
Court, what else?
That's right. No, I totally get it. I get it.
But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. Alex, I'm still on my own. Hold on, this morning, somehow. Oh, yeah.
What did we do?
Well, we had.
That Montana was beautiful. We went this past weekend to Glacier. God, it was gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a great time of year.
It's a beautiful state. Well, that part of the state anyway. It's beautiful.
It's starting to cool off a bit too.
Oh, God. We stayed on Waterton Lakes in Canada, which I didn't know was the second windiest spot in Canada. We were in the Prince of Wales Hotel, which is an old hotel that is there. It was shaking. It was blowing so hard.
It's like my current house. When you have those
I
7
think your
mile.
windows work a little better than theirs do. We didn't have to have the windows open to get air.
In your house?
No, at the Prince
So
of Wales
which,
Hotel.
which province of Canada?
It's Alberta.
Okay.
But it's part of Glacier National Park, but it's on the Canadian side, which I found.
Did you drive or did you fly?
We only have 5 days.
Did you fly to that Cape Town?
No, because
Where did you fly?
flies there for twice the cost that Frontier flies to Missoula. So we flew to Missoula, rented a car and drove, and that's not a bad drive at all.
Okay.
It's a 2-day drive up from here, and we only had 5 days altogether, so it was a really nice trip, one I recommend. Pretty soon it's going to be too late, everything's going to close, but in the future, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous national park. Grizzly bear hunt with them. You got a grizzly bear hunting badge for scouts? I had my cow, my bear dog.
Oh, thanks. Do you need this back, Sandy, or did you copy it?
Tomorrow is Wednesday.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thursday. It's the only one day.
Okay.
I guess,
I must have
yeah.
been, I must have saved it when we were asking what days we could meet. It's got all 3 days listed for budget. Well, the next one will be at the meeting, right? September 11th.
We'll probably need another one just because.
Oh, okay. That's what Chris just said.
Yeah. Let's look at that. Good luck.
It'll go faster. Well, tomorrow will go faster. The first date is always, you know, you're getting everything out.
Glad you're not. That's awesome. It usually does come down here.
It picks up.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's on the phone, I think. Okay.
So the last couple of revenue items, court revenue, a little bit down this year. We're anticipating it'll jump back up to come more traditional 2015 levels. And miscellaneous revenue, the only anomalies there are in 2016. We're working right now to get the final FEMA flood reimbursement from the 2013 event. And then on line 79, you'll see the sale of asset. That's the land, the town land that was sold to the CenterPoint developer. So that takes us to revenues. And Trustee Hanson, we haven't forgotten your question about kind of fund balance, but we'll maybe do that at the end of expense discussion. So let's go ahead and jump into general fund expenses. We have this broken down into categories or cost centers. What we'd ask folks to do as they're going through this is just identify any real large changes they see in any of these particular areas. So we'll start with legislative for either Matt or Martin to discuss anything they'd like to talk about here.
Everything's pretty consistent with previous years here. Nothing stands out. Lobbying is through the Mayor's Commissioners Coalition Group for US 36 corridor and other regional type of lobbying efforts there. And we just assume that, and then any lobbying efforts the town might want to take up, whether it's Rocky Flats or any other issue that might come up that we want to hire a lobbyist for during the year. So, yeah.
So all of the expenses, the fees we pay for like DRCOG, the US 36, Mayor's, I don't know, Mayor's Coalition, I don't know, whatever. Where are they line item down inside, or is that part of this?
They're down in the bottom.
Okay.
They're down in the bottom. When we get to non-departmental, the very last categorization, we'll show you where those
Okay,
are.
they're not much, but I just, when you talked about the
Yeah, they're in the
lobbying for the
memberships.
Mayor's Coalition,
Yeah.
then I thought, where are all those other little fees at? Okay, thank you.
Okay, judicial, Martin, any comments here? Clerk, Phyllis, do you want to, I think about the only variability we have here is that election line. So it looks like we anticipate the elections every couple of years. So again, not a lot going on there. Admin?
Martin?
Good morning, all. The administrative budget, the town manager and I have coordinated on a fairly consistent budget from year to year. The one change that would be noted from 30,000 to about 40,000 from this year to next year in planning services is really to help capture some of the expenses associated with some of the plan review, whether that's having somebody check bearing data on plats, shipping, some of the costs associated with just all the parts and pieces that are involved in plan review and the development review application process. But that's really about the only line that changed significantly this year.
And so for finance, the only item I want to note is, wherever the heck it's in there, in personnel services, you'll see a bump there of about $8,000 from this year to next year, and that's to continue the EcoPass program. We had that program subsidized this year with all the construction work on 36. we received a subsidy for EcoPasses, but this is continuing the EcoPass program for staff and board next year and in the following years as well.
Does the EcoPass get you on the, I know we discussed it, but the call and ride, Superior call and ride, that's part of it, so if I use that, then there's no expense.
I used it twice yesterday, and so there was no charge on that. Legal services, again, Matt and Martin, you can comment on this, but we do have a small provision in 2017 for Jefferson Parkway. And we've got the base budget there. You can see in 2017, this is on line 107 of 135. It bumps in 18 because that is a year where we have a franchise fee renegotiation with Excel. So we're recognizing there may be some additional expenses associated with that. On public safety, for public safety in the law enforcement line, that represents Sergeant Chamberlain and his folks at Boulder County in line 113. You'll see that spike, Jeff, and go out to the out years in 19 as well as again in 21, and those represent the new deputies that we had talked about earlier. And again, just part of the longer term plan. And you'll see actually this next year, the preliminary budget we received from the sheriff is actually going down. We've been able to stabilize the dispatch services budget with them as well. So, with the high quality of service and the prices actually decreasing. Thank you, Sergeant Chamberlain. Building inspection.
I'll step in on this one. There isn't really a significant change. Similar to admin, there's a lot of ongoing expenses that have remained relatively consistent. We expect them to be relatively consistent going forward.
So for Parks, Rec, and Open Space before Patrick, it's in some of the specific lines. Again, on the staffing side, so on line 136, that's where you'll see the increase, if you go to the out years, please, Jeff, to 20, what do we assume, maybe 2022, we'll have another field tech for Patrick's operation. So that's where it shows there. And we'll just let Patrick comment on any of the other material changes he has.
Thank you. No real significant material changes. You'll notice a decrease in the town's contribution to the Superior Morgul Classic, which kicks in 2017. And then just a couple other items of note. New this year was the dedicated fund for the volunteer projects and Youth Leadership Council. And both of those have been good additions. But other than that, everything holding fairly similar to previous years.
And here's also where we had the placeholder on line 162 for the new expenses associated with North Pool. And as the manager identified, we'll look at a minimum of pushing that project out 1 year. So in Public Works, again, before Alex talks about any of his individual lines, in 2019, you'll see the spike then for his field tech position there. And then on the rest of those operating lines, Alex?
What I'd like to point out is on the snow removal line item, we did bump that up because we are bidding it out this year. We opened bids on Thursday. This anticipates just maybe a potential increase over what we've had before. We also included in the bid actually a fourth vehicle. Normally we have 3. I don't think that's reflected in this budget, so we'll have to see what bids come in on Thursday, and that'll be going to the board on September 12th. So you'll have some issues about policy discussions about whether you want to increase the level of service, especially in cul-de-sacs. We haven't had that discussion yet, but I need to bid it out, and we need to get those cost figures in. So that'll be coming forward.
In September, you said?
I open bids on Thursday, September 1st, and it goes.
Yeah, they're out.
So if we're going to have the discussion about cul-de-sacs, doesn't that have to be part of the bid?
It's a time and material.
Oh, they
It's
did-
time. and-
oh, is that what he said?
All
Oh,
the
okay.
agreements have time and material built into them,
Okay.
so if we decide to add cul-de-sacs, it'll be reflected. And Alex and I had a discussion about a fourth truck, and what it allows us to do, especially with the new roundabout that we're putting in McCaslin, it'll allow us to keep 2 trucks on McCaslin, especially in the bad storms, and have the other 2 trucks hit the other streets. So we thought it was important to have that second
So
truck
I think
on
what we'll do
McCaslin.
is 2 trucks will be on McCaslin all the time. We'll have 1 truck on Colton, 88th, and then we'll have 1 that can start on the local streets much earlier in the storm than we have in the past. So we may have a bump just in that, and then we'll have additional costs, unit prices for additional vehicles in case we want to up the level of service on cul-de-sacs.
Okay. Matt, another question, totally outside of this conversation, but I keep forgetting to ask. We had that staging lane leaving here from Coal Creek to get on McCaslin, and now you don't have that anymore, so you got to sit there and wait. Well, many times there's traffic going by. Is that any chance of getting that staging lane back at any time? Is that what
Yeah,
you-
so when the roundabout's done, Main Street's done, people can use that to get on Main Street, then we would be able to add that acceleration lane back, because that temporary left will go away.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that it is in the plan to have that, I call it a staging.
Is that,
acceleration
am I
lane.
correct, Alex? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yep, thanks.
I don't have a question for Alex. When we finish with Alex, I have a question.
Okay, I have a question for Alex. Alex, your regular salaries are going up like 5.5% to 6%. Everybody else's is going up 3%. So what is the difference in that?
What is it?
So what we're looking at doing is we are looking at a salary adjustment for Alex's, real workers, the guys out in the field who are at the low part of the range, and get them more in tune with industry standards. We're seeing, relatively high turnover in that particular position, so we're looking at a little bit additional appropriation, of roughly $10,000, to look at a range adjustment for those particular workers.
Okay, well, we can talk about that more when we get into salary adjustments, but I just noticed that his is twice the, percent increase for his budget versus everybody else's that I've seen so far. I mean, I'm just doing the.
No, that's a good point to bring
I'm doing a
out.
calculation without a calculator, so it may not be correct, but.
And then I think, so the board knows, and it was in a lot of the other supplemental information that we received, we have a 4% salary pool for a budget increase for 2015.
Yeah, which we'll talk about when we get there into the assumptions.
Okay?
I
Or
would like to
now
talk about-
may be a good time, because we're going to be soon away from salary. So I think now, if you have a question about that, now would be a
Okay.
good time to chat about that.
Then now would be a good time to chat about that, I guess. So you have a 4% across the board budgeted increase for, across the board? Is that what you're saying? There's a 4% across the board increase?
That is
And-
correct.
It's important, yeah, so it's merit-based. There's no cost of living increase, some other cities, they have a merit-based increase and then a cost of living. Cost of living, everybody gets no matter what. Ours is strictly merit-based, and it's not assumed that everybody gets 4%.
So you have a 4% pool.
Right.
So some people could get 0, and some people could get 6% or 8%.
I think
you know.
6% is typically the cap that we would
Yeah,
have.
the cap. I mean, if you took all your pool and gave it to 2 people, they'd get a much larger than 4% increase. Okay, so, and then I just like to, I think I asked this last year, but we really never, other than that, I just think that we need to, I just like to understand how the merit, it's kind of hard to sit here and ask, how does the merit work? I mean, how do you determine whether someone is meritoriously awarded an increase in salary? And did last year we use up every bit of the 4% pool that we had? Or did we have some cases where we didn't use all the merit pool that was set aside because it wasn't required to be used? And in that case, coming next year too, when you create, you're really going to give the merit increase based on work from this year, so that next year the salary goes up per this budget. I didn't explain that well, but we're actually saying that people are going to be evaluated now, and then that 4% is going to be applied and spent in 2017. It isn't that they're going to get a 4% increase for their work of 2017. It's really based on what they did this last year. Right. And so you're assuming that you're going to use all 4% of that pool, and the salaries are going to go up across the board, total numbers. Not for everybody, but the total number, we're going to raise our salary payroll by 4% next year.
Right. That's the assumption. Typically, we're spent under that, whatever percent increase that's in the budget. Is typically, we are under that. We can get you what last year and the previous year were, because I don't know off the top of my head, but in total, do you know the total dollar amount?
Total dollar amount's about $90,000 to $100,000.
So
Is what that 4% pool represents over all the operating departments.
Right, because here, just in Public Works, the increase is like $40,000,
Yeah.
$35,000 increase in their.
I mean, the benefits of
out of $40 million,
benefits of having
it's not a lot,
Yeah.
but it just.
The benefits of having a small staff are that when it comes to something like this, it's not a significant impact on the budget compared to other organizations, that have 3-4 times as many employees as we do.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting, just be clear, I'm not suggesting that people aren't and shouldn't be considered for
No, I
merit
know.
awards.
Yeah.
I just think that we need to do it the way that other businesses, and other people, residents, they get, in their businesses, how they get considered for increases, and how they receive increases themselves in their own personal lives.
Yeah.
So we need to do the same.
And ours is strictly performance-based.
Okay.
There's no guarantees.
This, to me, is perhaps the biggest divergence in how it's handled between private and public. In private industry, when I've been involved in budget setting, this was very, very closely reviewed throughout the organization. And I have been dissatisfied with how close a look the board, as the ultimate gatekeepers here, take a look at this. And it is a significant cost in total for the town. At this point last year, I actually asked for a process during this year in which perhaps that subcommittee was assigned, subcommittee of trustees was assigned to look at the total compensation package of our town staff relative to other public entities our size and as well as private industry. This 4% that we're imputing, 4% last year, and it was certainly more than private industry during the recession and post-recession. I would like to call for that process again. I cannot tell you whether or not our staff is paid fairly compared to other municipalities, and whether or not raises and the entire package, particularly the pension type of end of things. I can't tell you right now if it is keeping pace, if it's overdone, or it's underdone. But we as trustees have this duty, and I would like us to meet that duty. And I'm offering my services in the, future.
We, Finance Department has that information that they can get to the board. I will say that we have an exceptional staff, very small for the size community, and the demands that this community puts on our staff is incredible what they're able to do with the resources they have to meet this. And and by having such a small staff, the costs for benefits and salary are significantly lower than any other community of our size.
No debate here. To a man, to a woman, I believe our staff works very hard. But nonetheless, we have a duty to understand how this aspect of the amount of money, this aspect of the budget entails. And I think it's uncomfortable for us as publicly elected officials to really tackle this, so we haven't tackled it in the 6.5 years I've been on the board, and I do think we need to address it either which way. If we're underpaying our people, we need to know that as well. So I just would like us to, rather than this coming and going every budget year, I would like us to understand it and sign off on it, and, with knowledge. So that's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for, don't presume I'm saying everybody's underpaid, because I'm not saying that. But I do feel we need to meet our obligation with this particular set of line items.
And that has to be crystal clear that this is not micromanaging you. You know your staff better than anybody else, and if it's merit-based, I like that fact. I was very surprised that when you looked at the next couple of years that you're not planning on hiring anybody else, because I know that I feel like we're understaffed, honestly, and I have felt like we're asking and demanding in this town is so much of our staff that they're stretched to their limit, and then we're continuing to add and add. More people are moving in. We got more housing. I'm surprised you're not adding anybody the next couple of years. How did you arrive at that?
Yeah, it's a process we go through all the departments as we develop the budget. It's not an easy process because the town has set the expectation policy that we're going to contract out most of our services. So the last few years, it was, there was quite a bit of debate and discussion about the positions we did add. So my direction to staff has been, if we need more resources, then look for contractors to help us with that.
And is that less expensive? I mean, is that, to hire out all the time?
Well, it's ebb and flows. As, we're in a high development cycle right now, so some of those contracting fees for inspections and things like that and reviews go up. But then when we're in a down cycle, those costs go down.
But it feels to me like we're in an up cycle and will be for the next 5 years. So,
right.
I mean, that's not a short term. It's not like, okay, for the next 6 months, we're going to ramp up, but then there's no point of hiring somebody because after 6 months, we've got to let them go. We're looking at a significant shift in growth in our town that hasn't happened for quite a long time, at least for the next 5 years. So I would urge you to reconsider that and think about if you need to bring perhaps 2 or 3 key people to help, because it's not a short-term thing.
And is this on? Yeah, if I can just put my 2 cents in on for the field techs. We've had real difficulty retaining our field techs, and we've had a lot of turnover in there. And if you look at where we're starting from, and you've seen $15 an hour thrown around, and that's what we pay our field techs. That's what we start them at. Plus, we have benefits, so I think it's a little more than the discussion you've seen. But if you look at Boulder County, where they could live on that wage, I mean, they're living farther and farther, and these people have to respond, to emergencies. They have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to try to get here. So they're living farther and farther. So I think that's an issue that you should be aware of as you have these policy discussions.
And to me, turnover can be expensive by itself. Like in the corporate world where I do my leadership training, that's one of the things we look at, on whatever level of the organization. So I like retention more than, when you lose good quality people for a variety of reasons. So thanks for bringing that up, Alex.
So a couple of quick comments. So to follow up, Trustee Pennington, on your particular issue, a basis maybe to help you get some additional foundational elements on how we compare salaries, how we modify salaries compared to our competitors. That detail is in your supplemental budget. It's, half a dozen pages of a very, very detailed explanation of what we go through as it relates to the, compensation plan and potentially modifying that to ensure people comparably are paid the same with our competitors. So there's a bit of information for you there. And if in fact, we need to have some additional discussion, we obviously will. But generally, as the manager said, our payroll costs are materially lower than other similar type of folks who are in our business municipalities. Our salary and benefit costs are about 25% of our operating costs, where most municipalities, you'll see that number, 75 to 80%. So it provides us, much more flexibility. There are obviously some additional demands. And a component of that, we follow this closely, is the benefit component. What percent of salaries are applied to benefits? And we're typically in the 35 to 37% range, and that's pretty close. I don't want to pick on Boulder County, but just to let you know, Boulder County's benefit as a percent of salary is actually closer to 45%. So, but we have all those statistics if you need or want any additional information. Yeah, we'll send it out to the board.
I appreciate that. And could you also tell us, like last year, what the salary pool, merit increase pool was and how much you used of that? It's probably in there somewhere. I haven't gone through every page of all your supplemental, but just because you mentioned it, so it would be great to know that. The benefits, now let's move to those. I know, Paul, you said that. I looked, and it's 30% to 40%, depending on which department we're talking about. Public Works, again, is 40% benefits as to salary. So is there something different, special about Public Works that cause their benefits to be higher?
So we will
payroll benefits, payroll costs.
Right. So we're looking at payroll costs. So in this particular case, we'll look at line 181 compared to salaries.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we will look at actual benefit expenses for each individual department. If a department has some lower wage individuals, like Alex's department, about half of his are the field techs. As he's saying, we're paying $15 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
If they take, for example, a family medical coverage, that expense, as it relates to their percent of salary, is materially higher. They have a low wage, a relatively high family benefit package, so that may skew the percentages. But it just is what it is. It's a basis of the denominator as it relates to salaries, how many high wage, how many low wage, and then within individual departments, it'll vary. Some departments are family health coverage heavy. Some departments, we have a number of individuals who don't even take our health care coverage, so their actual benefit expense would be lower as a percent of salaries. But on an aggregate basis, town-wide, we get into that kind of 35 to 37% level.
Okay,
so that's why you'll see that variability, to answer your question.
That's an excellent explanation. That's a great explanation. And so we cover, as a town, 100% of their health care benefits, even if it's a family coverage?
We do not.
Oh, okay. So why
family
would that come up as an expense, and you're talking about family expense versus individual health care benefit?
So quickly, we cover 100% of a singles coverage, an employee plus one at 90%, and at a family at 85%.
Oh, okay. So we do cover the family, but it's not the 100%, it's at 85%.
It's not 100%, okay. But then the cost, obviously, of the family coverage is, materially
higher.
More than an individual coverage.
Right, okay. And then my other question about that, and I asked this a few months ago, too, and I don't think we've had the discussion, but I'd like to understand a little better about our 401k or our benefits, our benefits as related to retirement. Is it 14%, or what is the amount that we put into a fund for retirement, explain that to me, Paul. How do we cover retirement funding for employees, full-time employees?
So the town has what is called a defined contribution plan. We contribute, an X% of salary versus the, decades ago, the defined benefit plan where you get an X%. Our plan calls for 15% of salary vested over a period of 4 years. So someone doesn't get that entire 15% unless they worked here for a total of 4 years. So each year that they are here, it starts when they start here, they're vested at 20%, and then each year they work for the next successive 4 years, they vest or are entitled to get an additional 20% a year.
So every payroll period, the town puts 15% of your salary into an account, an investment account for you.
Correct.
And is that every payroll period or at the end of the year?
We do it every payroll.
You do it every year, but the individual doesn't get their hands on it. It doesn't start vesting until the end of the year? Or does it vest every year, a quarter of it or a fifth of it, as soon as you invest it, or put it in the account?
So it vests, or the employee is entitled to it on their employment date.
Anniversary? Okay. And then, so you put in 15%. Do the employee put in anything? Is it a match, or is it just a flat 15%?
There's no match for the employee.
And the employee can't add to it if they want to?
We have additional plans, 457 plans, where yes, the employees can, contribute additionally, but there's no match from the town on that side.
Okay. And then other towns, because 15% is really high. It's high. It's much higher than most businesses ever have, unless you're an officer at a very high and you have an individual contract. But I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, how does it compare to other cities of our size?
So that's part of the benefit analysis that we do, and we'll give you that information. You need to remember, though, that many municipalities are in Social Security as well as providing then additional benefits. So if you're in Social Security, then the employer is responsible for contributing that 7.65%. And then in addition to that, they will contribute more into a 401 plan. And you'll see from the data that we'll provide that collectively what additional employers contribute to an employee, either through Social Security plus a 401 contribution, is at, or many times exceeds that 15% cost that the town has. But we'll give you the data on that.
Another excellent clarification, that you don't pay Social Security. Either the employee or the employer doesn't pay. Do we, as a town, pay Medicare?
We do pay the 1.45%.
Okay, so we pay the 1.45, but we don't pay the Social Security.
The 6.2,
and then you all,
correct.
as employees, are not eligible for Social Security as a part of your employment here at the town of Superior.
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, no contribution.
So then the 15 isn't as high as it would appear without taking out that 7% that you'd have to pay yourself and the town would contribute. Thank you.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so once you have the data, I think, and we'll provide some level of explanation, it'll come a little clearer there. So any other questions relating to salary or benefits in general? Alex, any other comments you have on your operation?
So I just wanted to point out on Call and Ride, that just started August 1st, and so we would have local match for the next 2 years of $35,000. That's the operational costs. And then in 19 and 20, we're projecting to pick up the whole amount. Again, that's a policy decision when we get to that point. And hopefully by that time, the Call and Ride's established and RTD will see fit to pick it up. So that may go away, but we've been very conservative to have that there. And again, you'll have a policy decision at that point whether you want to continue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that every month, in every communication, we should stress that Call and Ride is available. I think the only way we're going to get RTD to pick it up and make it a permanent part of, or a regular part, ongoing part of their service is to have a lot of people using it. So I think every chance we get, we should say, remember, Call and Ride's there. Because people forget. They might use it once or twice, and then 2 months later, they forget that it's still available.
Alex, can you review that again, what you just said about the Call and Ride in the outer years? Is that if it's not successful and RTD drops it, then we're going to assume it 100%?
We'll have to decide.
We have the option to assume it.
But it's built into the budget for
Yes.
that? Yeah. Okay.
So I think we had made a commitment when we got the grant. Dr. Cog had asked, well, what's going to happen after 3 years? And we said, well, we committed, I guess, that we would continue funding it if it wasn't working. But I think that's still a policy decision that the board.
We
can
have an
make.
option to continue funding it, and they'd give us the bus virtually
For $1.
for $1 or something like that,
So this will be just the operational cost. We've already,
to hire people to
Got
actually
it.
drive the bus.
That's good.
Right.
So
For
on
free.
Colin Wright, can the board receive a report once a month in terms of ridership, in like the weekly digest or something, so we can monitor?
yes, we're supposed to get, I think, quarterly reports.
Okay.
Of the ridership and expenses and all that, so we haven't gotten our first one since it just started August 1st.
Right, because we talked about this back when we lost it, that when we got it back, we're going to be really aggressive here. And I actually was going to use it last week sometime, and by the time I added up all the people in my parties, it was a substantial expense, and I thought, what the heck, I'm just going to go drive the 3 minutes and park my car there. So there are elements of this decision that affect ridership, and, we got to be aware of all that.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah. With respect to getting that report, when RTD decided to reduce services, they used a metric of how much, a certain number of pickups or something.
3 trips per hour.
Yeah, 3 trips
To
per
cut
hour.
us out. So I'd like to have that measured against whatever metric they were using at that time to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
how we're
you'll get a
measuring.
per hour ridership number, so we'll know where we're at.
And one of the things that I know that I thought we should have at the beginning, would have liked to have seen, is that the Colin Wright actually goes to the Louisville Library. I don't think it does today, so I think we should ask again if we, because if it goes to Flatiron Mall, but that's to help the teenagers.
Yeah.
But can we ask if it can actually
Because I
go-
think it goes to the rec center, so yeah, we'll check.
That
It
makes
goes-
sense. I mean, since
Yeah.
we have an IGA using the library, we might as well.
And if you want to, bring your little child with you and not have to drive the car and all that, I think we should have it go to the
That's
library
good.
in Louisville.
Just in terms of how things are displayed, why is the snow removal on 191, the contractor, and the snow removal materials down on 204? I'd
Yeah.
like them to be side by side so we could have an idea of the total.
We can certainly do that. We just sort this by our internal account numbers.
Okay.
Trustee Cirilli?
I'm reluctant to go back to Patrick for such a trivial item. But go back to Parks and Rec, and it's kind of slipped by me, and it's just something that's been on my mind a little bit. The Superior Morgul is going down it's gone down quite a bit, but on the other hand, it also seems to be becoming more remote from the community as an event. And it's really kind of a bike rider, it seems to me, a bike rider event. And does that 15,000 include staff time?
Just go back.
He doesn't want to answer
That, if you remember, that initial contribution was, I think we were around 30, and then we've kind of stair-stepped it down. That was actually just to help offset their cost to bring the race to town in hopes of bringing additional people to Superior. So it doesn't really factor in cost for staffing or the time that we put into it, or
Which
the
is-
time that we do advertising.
Pretty substantial, isn't it?
That's actually gone down. I think what we learned really quickly with the Morgul, and especially when the Pro Challenge came around, that the Morgul was just another cycling race on the calendar for these cyclists, so it was really hard to treat it like a community event. We didn't experience a lot of residents being interested in watching it as a spectator sport. It's kind of a hard spectator sport to watch. And then cycling really caught some legs as an activity in Colorado, and we realized these guys and gals that were racing, it's just another race for them. They get on their bike, they do the ride, and then they head out. So we've really kind of taken a back seat But this really just kind of ensures that they'll continue to bring the race to town
Okay,
year
so
after year.
that's getting back to my initial, even if it's only 15,000, doesn't mean enough for us to continue contributing. It's just something to think about anyway.
I would still go back to the discussions we had about bringing back Superior Days and bringing that all together and make it a town-wide event. Maybe not everybody will go watch the race, but they're participating in something else. And even more so once the town center goes in, we get a hotel here, then we'd expect all the bikers to stay in our hotel. But making it a true town-wide event by bringing back Superior Days and combining.
I mean, Founder's Park seems like a good location for something like that,
Yeah.
because there's parking close by with the marketplace.
What we did before, remember, we used to do.
Yeah.
It was a great event.
And
Anyway.
and then everything's concentrated in one park. I would say for one day, because the demands on just to try to have it over 3 days, an event, as far as.
You don't need to do it, I mean, you do the Superior Days portion just
Right,
one day.
right, yeah.
But if you do it at Founder's Park, you also get to see the race too.
Right, yeah.
So I think it should be done.
Mhm. Yeah, we did realize pretty early on in the process, there was a big disconnect between spectators who wanted to watch the race because their family member was in it, and then just your everyday public. It was really, really difficult for us to try to bring the two worlds together.
Yeah.
But we've definitely thought about, a Superior Days type event, something over on this side of town.
Yeah, that vintage baseball game was really fun. And then you can involve the chamber with the local businesses and their booths and all that stuff, and just a fun day.
Yeah, it was very much so.
So Patrick, what's the benefit to the town of continuing to underwrite the Superior Morgul?
We definitely are known as a cycling-friendly community, and we do, I think, see some benefit from having the 400 to 500 cyclists come in on that weekend. The Morgul Loop will always be a famous loop. So I think the name recognition definitely helps. A lot of people, I think, come out here on the weekends to ride. I know we've talked to the guys at the bike shop. The friendliness, the cycling friendliness of the community helped factor in their decision to come out here. So I do think it's really good name recognition for the community as a cycling-friendly community.
Again, I think we need to keep that going until the town center is done, because once that's there and we have all the other things in town, such as the hotels, then possibly the other bicycle races. What's the one that it went through Boulder one year?
Pro-Am?
The Pro Challenge.
If there's a way.
That's slipping too.
Again, there's going to be other bike races like that.
And one of the things we've talked about from very early on is moving the criterium to the town center. Something else that we've had to do over the last couple of years with the Morgul is, due to some resident pushback and the cost and the kind of hassle, if you will, of closing all the roads, is the criterium's no longer really in town, because that was a huge impact on Colton Road, residents of the Summit, businesses down there. And then the time trial, when you look at the amount of cars on McCaslin and the roundabout, it was just no longer safe to run the time trial. So in a sense, we're kind of paying for 3 races that actually aren't hosted in town like they used to be. So I think with the town center coming in and the streets laid out the way they are over there, it really does lead itself to bringing some of those elements back to town, especially the criterium. I mean, to have that in the town center, I think would be a huge win. And that time trial race, that's just it's tough to pull off with the amount of traffic that we have. You really need long, straight roads, and those are a little bit harder to find. So.
Well, we're going to have another roundabout here too very soon.
Sort of what we're all touching on here is continued support for the Superior Morgul. It almost becomes an image building cost, and an awareness, advertising, whatnot, is keeping Superior on the map. And it's in our bullet points, about what distinguishes us, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really sort of how you've got to assess it. However, when it was brought back, I was brand new on this board when it was brought back, and it was intended to be, Joe, you're going to have to, Elia, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here. It was brought back as a real social,
Oh, yeah.
you know, a thing and a community building
A lot of
and that kind of stuff.
volunteers.
Yeah, and so those first years were really, really fun.
Concert in the
because
park
yeah,
and-
yeah, and now it's morphed into this, like you just said, you know, we're on the circuit, and so I'm,
It's a little disappointing
yeah.
that it's morphed that way.
So, and now that Memorial Day window and stuff makes the weather a little more tenuous and stuff like that, but I think we've got to assess it. If it doesn't recapture some of that earlier panache, et cetera, down the road, I think we're going to have to rethink this.
And I do think due to the popularity of the race from the cycling perspective, they would continue to bring the race here. And maybe we look at doing something where we do some kind of event. My first couple of years here with Martin, we were responsible for running the race
That was great.
and an
Yeah.
event. And that was Chili Fest, 4th of July,
All together.
all together, plus that the soccer camps would go on. That was the weekend that we opened the pool, and that was almost unbearable for staff to manage. I think the race, like any of the other running races or races that come through town, I think it's popular enough that the promoter would still maybe try to find a way to bring it here. Maybe not 3 days, but I think that they would find the value in bringing it here.
Initially, wasn't the idea that, yes, we need to help finance some of that, but eventually, as it grew in popularity and prestige, that there would be enough money coming that we wouldn't have to be putting money out of pocket, or am I not remembering this
And
right?
it started out at, what was our con?
120,000?
Yeah, like, over $100,000 was our contribution.
okay.
So we're down to 15.
Yeah.
But is the goal
Yeah.
to continue to contribute something, or is it the goal to?
Well,
be
we
neutral at
evaluate that
some
every
point?
year in our discussions with the promoter. I mean, we may get to a point where we just don't contribute anything.
I think you're going to get to a point, though, you're going to recognize the revenue benefit.
That's what I'm
I mean,
saying.
once, we can get to that point, we just got to plan it properly.
And some of this changed too when we started to stair-step that down. The town used to collect the race fee registrations. And again, we quickly realized that Parks and Rec Department shouldn't have anything to do
Right.
with the competitive cycling world.
Mhm.
That is two completely different
But there are
worlds.
things, as we have
What can we
hotel
do?
rooms,
That's right.
we can
Yes.
require that the Superior hotel rooms
Yeah.
be the preferred stay.
Especially
But
if you give
most
a
of them
better rate.
don't.
Well, typically
Stay
you have
here.
a host hotel.
Yeah,
A
right,
host
right,
hotel.
right. They'll have, but I
But if
think
they're
that-
spending money in town,
Right.
in the retail, and
I think
Definitely worth
$15,000 as to have Superior still in the name of it is worth, it's like advertising.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 15,000 to have Superior in the name of the Superior Memorial is a good thing. It appears to be a good thing, you know, and I also like the idea of combining it with other things, instead of just having it be the race and all of us go, oh my, we have to go to this corner and go someplace else because that street's closed for the time trials or the race. We have it be that there's something else happening at the same time. I mean, you know, like I even like going to the Jingle Bell race run. I don't run it, but it's just so much fun to be out there in the cold and drinking your hot chocolate when the mayor and his family are out there running in the cold. To watch all these people. So those kind of things, if you can do them and it's seen as a Superior event, then I think it's worth some amount of money, but not
And
a
just
huge.
a quick follow-up, so a couple lines above that, line 149, where we're at 72. So that's the line where we pay for all of our community events out of. That line does not contemplate any new event. So if we were to bring back a Superior Days, we would maybe follow up with a cost.
Well, we're not going to be able to do it by next year. We can't put that on your plate, you know, but the following year, the next year, we should think about if there's any other events that might make sense.
So getting down to the bottom here, the next big expense category is something called non-departmental, and these are expenses that traditionally don't fall into individual departments. So I think for the most part, Martin and I will kind of go through these. And again, just as a placeholder, and we had it last year as well, but we have a placeholder in 18 for additional utilities and additional maintenance expense for the town hall addition. And again, that's just a placeholder, recognizing how that project
Is that
is
the
moving
town paying
forward.
its own tap fee?
No, these are utility expenses. For a large part, we have utility expenses budgeted for Sergeant Chambers' operation, for Alex's operation. We have those budgeted in their line up above, and then we're moving those expenses, down here to represent we would be potentially abandoning those sites and then paying for, new utility expenses associated with the addition. So these are ongoing costs, many of which are removed from the budgets up top. And again, just as placeholders. So before we get down to yard waste, Martin and I'm sorry, Trustee Dozell, you had asked as it relates to those membership costs for, we have Jeff comment that, we just have our myriad of general membership expenses. You recognize many of those, so that's where those land. Any comments from anyone before we get to yard waste? Okay, so Jeff, if you'll go down to yard waste, which we traditionally had budgeted at $30,000, and I think we are looking at some changes to this program.
Whoa.
Yeah, so yard waste is a popular place, and we're keeping it open year-round. So in the past, we had it open just mainly in the summer months. But now we're keeping it open year-round just as an added benefit to residents, because there's nice days in the fall and sometimes in the winter that, people need to dispose of yard waste. So these are mainly, I think, dump fees, to haul the bins out once they get full and bring them back in. So
Well, 2 weekends ago, like I said, I saw George over there, 5 roll-offs
Yeah.
on Saturday and Sunday. He moved 5 and brought 5 empty ones.
Yeah, yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy, but 5 in 2 days.
And do they chip that up here at their site?
Yeah.
And do they compost it there as well and then bring?
I'm not sure.
The composting process does start at their yard, and then they supplement with some other organics material that they bring in.
Okay.
And
Is compost available year-round, or is it available now?
It would be available, yep,
And
year-round.
they bring it back and they dump it, they leave
Correct.
a pile there at the yard waste so
Yep.
that you can take buckets, and yeah, we've taken some.
And just,
It's good.
But is that the compost from here, from Superior Maintenance, or is it from Waste Management or whoever?
We've
it
used
is?
both.
We have both?
Yeah,
Okay.
the Kuffners have a pile that they've started. It takes a couple of years to get your compost the way you want it. So when we tap those guys out, we'll hit Western. There's a couple other vendors that we've used in short order. So, and just a quick point of reference, it's about $600 per haul. So that's where a lot of that cost comes in. This cost also factors in us working with typically Vargas to have a staff person down there. We were able to hire somebody this summer. But again, that's one of those positions, much like Alex. That's a hard position to fill. It's not always the most pleasant. We do tend to have a lot of customer service issues down there. We have to fight illegal dumping, so we do that. Fee also has. We pay anywhere between $5,000 and $6,000 a year for illegal dumping. If there's a certain percentage of material that's in there that's not organic, that has to be dumped, which is more expensive. So that factors in staffing as well.
So that person, you close the gates, do you, on every day but Wednesday afternoon, evening, and Saturday and Sunday?
Saturday and Sundays.
Right, and then, and like when I was there 2 Sundays ago, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, the guy that was there must have been a Vargas guy, I think.
Correct.
But he was very helpful, and he helped me even unload my 4 truckloads of stuff, you know. But it was, he was very helpful, but I was glad to see him there, because this summer, I've rarely seen someone there from the town. And I've been there a couple times when I
Yeah.
told people, you don't put that in there, plus you don't throw it on the ground.
Yep.
That's what people were doing, they were throwing it on the ground rather than the roll-offs.
Right now, our staff spends about 5 hours a week just pulling just debris and trash out. But yeah, there are times where our guys are out doing the rest of their job, whether it be irrigation or maintenance around town, and the yard at times is unattended.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So that number, just from going summer, early fall to year-round, just seems an extraordinary increase when I question whether year-round is necessary. There's time, January to April, when probably nothing's going on. You know, you want to get the late fall leaves, which, that was always my bugaboo. It closed too early for when my leaves decided to fall. And then you have storm events that you need to accommodate, but maybe we don't need to be open year-round. That's, if it's that much of a difference in cost, that's something to think about.
You know, I think residents need a place to take their stuff, and we have the site, and there's days in January and February that can get into the 50s at times, and, you know.
And I'm not mowing lawn, I'm not.
Right, but
You're not trimming stuff then.
Yeah, it's-
Yeah, but
What would they put, what's the usage during?
After Christmas trees, what's the
Oh,
usage?
yeah, right.
But, you know, that we've
Christmas
been-
trees, but then, you know, all the storms that we have in February, March, and April, branches are coming down like
Sure.
crazy. Last year, I had a lot of tree branches that I would take over there in that time frame. So I don't know, I think if you looked at it, and maybe that's what we should do, is look at it and see how much usage there is in January, February, March is really what you're talking about, the only time, because April, we have the snowstorm events that break the branches off. You know, the leaves are starting to come out and the branches all break off. And I don't know,
I mean, Rita, you're right. I mean, we're talking 9 months for sure, and then 3 months part-time.
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, on an
Right.
as-needed
But I
basis.
just,
But I think it
32 to 114, that's just a big jump.
No,
Well, there's been a lot, when I go over there, and I have a lot of trees, we have a lot of trees, so we have 50 trees in our yard. And so I'm doing 50, yes. I planted trees so I can't see what's going on behind my house, so, in my berm. But you know, yeah, 50. Calm down, 50
Well,
trees.
and our-
And then, so, you know, you have a lot of trimming that goes on. Our trees have matured now, so we have a lot
Yes.
of branches that come down. And it's not the grass that goes there. It's the trimming
Branches,
of the
yeah.
bushes and the trees. And that is a very wonderful thing to have for residents to use. Because otherwise you see them stuffing them into the bins to take for the garbage collection to take, and it
they're
doesn't work.
sticking out and-
They're sticking out, it doesn't work, and
Well, what's the difference if you go down from 12 months a year to just 9 months, and then on-call as needed for those 3 months?
Well, mainly the reduction that we're going to see if you take out those 3 months is the haul fee, you know, for the bins, and then some contractor time that would be down there to man the site. So we'd see reduction, and it's,
I mean, are you talking $25,000 or $5,000 difference, or?
I don't know, Patrick.
I mean, Chris, the on-call thing would be if there's a major wind event or
Right.
weather event that
Major
we have to open it up again.
ice storm or
Ice storm or something like that.
I think it just gets too confusing, though. I like it. I like the year-round. I like the consistency of knowing that it's open. I mean, to me, this is it's a big expense, but this sure makes a lot more sense than subsidizing people's large item trash hauling. I mean, that I have no problem. I have no problem eliminating that in favor of increasing this. So I'm
This
good.
is a
I'm
great
good with
service.
it.
I think the majority of households actually take advantage of this. I mean, this is pretty widespread.
And I think we could also maybe in those off months too, maybe it's not 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Maybe it's one day a week.
It's
Right.
every other
Yeah,
weekend.
Saturday only for
Yeah,
the
if
winter
there's a big
months.
difference in, I mean, if there's not a big difference in that cost, then I'd say, yeah, what the heck, leave it.
I mean,
Actually, you close, you're dark at 4:30, you
Yes.
close at dark.
Yeah.
So-
So how, when you have this incremental increase, it begs the question in my mind, are there other ways to skin this cat, right? So in that would be the curbside thing that I think RCAC has proposed in the past, curbside pickup and such. So,
Not for 4 truckloads of branches like I did.
But-
I mean, when I say truck,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean the back of my SUV,
But
you know. they don't pick that
I
up.
don't know, Rita, one way or the other. I also don't know if a majority of households use it, or the
You don't think
people.
they do?
I don't know. Or if the people who use it really just love it, and they keep using it again and again. So I'd actually, how do we monitor that these are Superior residents? So.
That's there.
So if a landscaper catches on to this, that landscaper from Denver can come and dump at this
Right, and
facility.
we encounter that all the time. We also encounter landscapers who tell us they're working on behalf of a resident. So this past year, we started looking at maybe some kind of tag program or a check-in program.
Right.
We thought about using your pool ID card, but not everybody's got
Right.
one. And then right now, we're using Vargas as the contractor, and they weren't comfortable with checking warranty deeds or anything like that. So that's something we're working on as well.
I mean,
Yeah.
we use landscaper that they go and dump
Yeah.
there, and sometimes I have to drive with them just to make sure, no,
Yep.
this guy's legitimate, he's not just.
Yeah, at a price of-
Bring their
Use
utility bill,
our backyard stuff.
or,
You
Yeah,
have your
It shows their
driver's
address,
license,
or
and
the
it
driver's
has your
license, exactly,
Superior,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
me, I have my driver's license, or I go, and I know
No, but
them
you go
all.
yourself, I'm saying,
Yeah.
the
Right.
example that Patrick brought.
right.
just-
But at 32.5, do I care? But maybe, maybe not, but at 116, I do care that Superior residents are the ones benefiting, and that we're paying costs of Superior residents. I suspect if we monitor it closely, we're going to find some weird stuff out about this one.
Yeah.
I've
So
used it all,
yeah.
as long as it's been open. I've always used it, and
But
in the past, 10 years ago, or whenever it started, I don't know when it started, but when it first started, I would see landscaper-type people come in, back their trailers up. I'd go up to them and say, you can't be here. You know?
Right.
But now, in the last 2 years, I have
They're not-
never
yeah.
been there when there's been someone that doesn't look like a resident there.
I agree.
Right. Well,
But it doesn't mean that they don't come, but I've never been there personally when I've seen somebody that looks suspect. And if they are, I'll go up to them and ask them. "Do you
Well,
live
if we're
here?"
paying for
What
Vargas.
street do you live in?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
But in the slow months, can we
Why
do what
not?
Chris suggested and maybe go down to one day a week
Well,
for those
my-
3 months? Is
My
that?
only concern with that, though, is you get a regular schedule, and you get somebody that loads their pickup up with branches, and they go down there when the day they thought it was supposed to be open, and it's the gate's locked.
Right.
You know, that's
It
that's
saves us
frustrating.
$20,000, I think, I don't know, for the slower
Well, is it a
months.
save
But
or is it a?
but if it's a slower month, it's going to be less hauling fees, and that
Yeah.
should regulate the cost. So.
I think in the winter, it doesn't need to be open on Wednesday. I would agree with that, because Wednesday from 4:30 to 7, who can actually get over there?
It's
and
kind of dark
do
anyway.
stuff? Huh?
It's dark by
And
then.
it's dark anyway.
And they're not open when it's dark.
Yeah, so.
At 116, we've got to have some bones put on the skeleton, is what I'm saying. We gotta think about this. If we have a Vargas employee there, let's have that Vargas employee check driver's licenses, right? And if it's your landscaper, well, guess what? It's 10 minutes from your house. You can accompany him.
No, I do.
there.
No,
Right.
I do,
So
but
can
I'm
I,
saying,
you know,
yeah, I
that
mean-
kind of thing. So we've just gotta manage it, I think, a little differently. And maybe, Joe, how would you feel? I don't know how staff would feel. I think staff's fully capable of fleshing this out a little bit. Not bones on the skeleton, flesh on the skeleton. Correct my own metaphor there. But, and maybe it's something we could ask RCAC to think about if we want to go down that path. I think staff's fully able to maybe flesh it out a little bit. for us, but it's a serious expense at 116.
Okay, a couple of comments. It's a great expense to have. I mean, we've always talked about trying to up our recycling in this town. And I always point to the yard waste. This is a great thing that we're doing. And there's no way that a curbside recycling for organic waste will take 4 of my back of my SUVs full of branches in a one pickup. I mean, I know Westminster picks up, you have to wrap them in bundles no bigger than 3 by 2 by something, you know, and you have to tie them in twine, organic twine, not plastic twine, and so that they can, so there's all these restrictions about curbside pickup that, you know, and if it was that I only saw one person every, you know, I went over there 4 times, like I said, a Sunday ago, and if I'd only seen one other person, but each time there were 2 cars ready to dump. Well, when I got there, and then like George came and picked up both of the full roll-offs, and he said he picked up 3 the day before. So I think for us to start saying that we have something that's successful and we're trying to limit it, we should look the other way. How do we make sure that we make it as efficient as
Totally
possible
agree.
and keep it?
Totally agree.
Yeah, instead of limiting it, I think we need to see how we can expand it and continue to make it as
Yeah,
efficient
I
as
certainly
possible.
don't want it limited at all. I mean, if the demand is there, let's have it open. But
Right.
if there's certain times of the year that there's just not going to be anybody there,
I just can't imagine in the winter that after Christmas, that there's that kind of need. I just don't imagine.
Unless there's a
Unless
snow
there's an event,
yeah.
because we've had a lot of those lately.
There
See, a
will
lot
be,
of
yeah.
the snow on the branches, and they cause a lot. And I think there's still people, it's just like anything. It's like using the pool. There's some people that'll never, don't even know the hours, don't even know, and never go to the pool. And there's this too, there's people that don't have any idea what the hours are for yard waste, but there's others that use it consistently.
Okay. We're about 5-7 minutes out. How are we doing?
A couple more things to go over, and then we should talk about what we still have left and maybe a possible 3rd meeting.
Okay.
So just to go through those last couple of lines, non-departmental, because they're relatively large, lines 235, 236 are part of the agreement with the developer of the Superior Town Center. This is a reimbursement of the portion of the building use tax and plan check and permit fees to help pay for some of those infrastructure improvements. So any development that happens over there, we reimburse a portion of those particular revenue lines. So that's what that represents. Now, we do want to note, though, that when the agreement, the initial development agreement was agreed to in 2013, and the amount of the public improvements were identified, what the board is seeing and what we're seeing as well is the amount of those public improvements, at least initially, are not anything close to what the initial estimate was. You know, we're seeing, for example, parking structures, which were potentially a reimbursable public improvement item. And the first phase of parking structures going in there, at least now, are private parking structures. Additionally, part of the reimbursement was if the developer paid for some of those connection fees to our utilities, what we call system development fees. And what we're seeing is developers not paying for those. The home builders will be paying for those. So just anecdotally, a note that the magic $145 million, our share of roughly $109 million of maximum reimbursement for public improvements. Initially, we're seeing the number's going to be much less than that, but you know, we'll keep an eye on it. You see those numbers. These are the things that go to your Dropbox account, which are the Superior Town Center public improvement request for reimbursement. So that information is available to you.
Hey, Paul, just, that's good to hear. So you're saying that as part of TIF, what we're expecting to spend towards that is going to be less?
That, all initial indications are correct. Yes, that is correct.
There was a discussion with the developer multiple times that if we did end up spending less, that we could actually increase the $10 million that was set aside for civic space. So maybe we bump it to $12 million and use TIF money for that. So that was a discussion that was had several times. Is that still on the table, or is that something that we can revisit?
I mean, manager would.
I think it's probably too early to say.
But I like your thinking.
Yeah.
I never realized that. I didn't know that that was part of it. But I think that's a very legitimate trade-off for a lot of things, like the fact that it hasn't built, huh?
Rec space.
Yeah, it hasn't built out as fast as they originally anticipated. We gave 100% of the incremental new property taxes for the town center to the development to use in recovery of their improvement, public improvement costs. And so far, they haven't realized that because they haven't built any property yet that's being incrementally taxed. And then the other thing is that I think, and they're going to come back, the developer, and ask us to extend again those FDP dates. And what are we going to get out of that as a town? We keep continuing to extend. So there's kind of a trade-off in a cooperative result that should come out of this.
Didn't mean to open a whole nother conversation, but that was something that was asked in public meetings on a few occasions, and that was said, yes, that's possible. So I don't want to lose sight of that. If that's an opportunity down the road to increase the civic space, then I'd like to continue to have that discussion.
Well, that's a good trade-off for this extension of dates and because they're going to have to come back, and the FDPs have already approved will not get completed by December 31st of this year, which are the second extension that we've given them. They're going to come back for a third extension. So that'd be a great discussion that we should have with them, the developer of the town center. What does a town get out of this? Because we weren't getting any incremental revenue, so let's get some more public improvements paid for through
But
that.
what I just heard, though, is it's too early to start trading things like that.
It's never too early to have a conversation when you're under a contract.
I'm fine having the conversation, but
And they're asking the contract to change, which is what the developer is going to be asking us, is to change the agreed-upon contract, which is dates. And then we can have that discussion. It's not too early to have that. Now, I have a question, though, about, I understand 236, and that's really reimbursing them for planning and permit fees, but you're saying 235 is the expected TIF that we're going to be providing to them, or it's the expense that's been approved as for reimbursement, but we haven't received that much property tax yet, have we? Or will we in 2017? Is that what you're anticipating that SURA will take in as revenue from the incremental property tax and then use and pay that money to the district, the Superior Town Center Metro District?
No.
Okay,
So a
good.
couple of items in there. We will get, that's a separate budget, and we will look at the incremental property tax revenues that will be going back. That's what this represents is as part of the development agreement, we agreed to reimburse any new building that happens over there, to reimburse building use tax at 100% for the first 5 years and 50% thereafter. So this represents reimbursement of building use tax for those 117 residential homes, as well as the 2 hotels and the medical office building.
Okay, so I just want to make clear, because that's what I thought, but you mentioned the approved reimbursable expenses, reimbursable through TIF, that goes in our Dropbox, is not in either one of those 2 lines. So I just want to make that clear to everybody that's listening. This has nothing to do with the TIF reimbursement.
That is correct.
Right,
But
because that comes in, we really haven't, we've approved, SURA and you all have approved expenditures as public improvements under the TIF reimbursement, but we've yet to realize very many revenues from new incremental building and property tax associated with that incremental building, new buildings, meaning in the town center, which then is used to reimburse the developer for these public improvements that have already been approved. It's a roundabout way to say
it is, but I just wanted to note, though, that these revenue components here are part of the reimbursement cap. The developer will be reimbursed for public improvements through TIF, property tax TIF reimbursement, as well as reimbursement of this building use and plan check and permit fee. Those are all.
So these are in the 109. I thought the 109 was only incremental TIF.
No, there's a there's a separate
Oh, there is a
component.
building in
There-
that Exhibit B.
I think there's
remember
roughly
that.
$8 million or
Right.
something
Okay.
that represents this reimbursement. So
Okay, I remember
again,
that there's a line.
These two
item.
revenue lines, the TIF property lines, those are the revenue lines that are going to reimburse for the public improvements.
Okay.
Then real quickly, this is the, as we discussed, Louisville revenue share, what, we're estimating goes back to Louisville, again, half of what that revenue number was you saw before. This transfer to District 1, that's the number that has dropped dramatically. In the past years, it was roughly $1.5 million, and now it vacillates every year, but I think it's going to average about $400,000 over this 5-year period of time. And then really anything else, and then we have the expense to Louisville. We show the property tax revenue generated for the library, and now we're showing the expense down here, the offset expense for the library. After we go through all the maturations, looking at all the revenue, all the expenses, any leftover revenues essentially go into this line 238. This is the balance line. This is what then is ultimately transferred to our capital program to help fund the capital program. So now, finally, Trustee Hansen, I think we're to your question. You had a question as it relates to transfers or changes in fund balance. Would you like to go through that?
Yeah, I just, I wanted to see if that was still something on the table, because it looked like we're going to just let those bonds be paid back in their natural lifespan. But we had the discussions before, and that was one of the big selling points at the town center, was that we're going to be generating $30+ million in service fees.
Mhm.
We're going to use that money to pay down our debt, which could maybe keep us from having to raise water rates and all kinds of other things. So is that still the plan?
Yeah, that's still the plan, but it's as the development happens, because that's when those
Right.
system development fees come in.
Right.
And you're seeing a reflection of some of those new development fees come in this 5-year plan already, with the water rate increases going down to 2.5% over the next 2 years and 0% over
Right.
the last 3
Okay.
of this plan. So, yeah,
So
we're.
I
it's
totally understand. I
yeah,
get it
yeah.
that we're projecting that there's going to be 170 or whatever homes being built in that 5-year span. We could
Well,
see
and
more
not
than
just,
that.
and the commercial as well, because
Yeah.
they pay, actually, they pay a more significant
That's
system
right.
development fee.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to be make sure that we're at the same mindset
Yeah.
that we were before, because that was a big selling point.
Yeah.
And again, the balancing factor at the end of the day, how much we determine go, for example, to the capital fund is, this line is very important. It kind of gets hidden at the bottom, but the board has a reserve policy on line 260 that identifies that we want to keep a minimum of 75% of prior year expenses generally, in the bank. So it's meeting that particular reserve goal. So we have gotten through one of our more important operations, general fund operation. I think, Mayor, depending upon how you'd like to proceed, I think maybe we stop here and then get into the other budgets. I think as the manager has already identified, we may need to start looking at a third meeting, because we have a meeting tomorrow morning scheduled again from 9 to 12, and that tentatively is
Yeah,
it.
we have the capital improvements program we start off with tomorrow, depending on how much discussion there is on that. We may be able to get through the rest of the budget, but we might need a third meeting.
And I'm going to be in California tomorrow, so I'm not going to be here.
Could we perhaps throw some tentative dates out there for that we could then look at overnight and talk, because I can't talk calendar from here.
Sure.
But,
I can say that I'm not here Wednesday, the 16th, is it, September?
Mhm.
Through the whole following next week, so almost 2 weeks I'm gone.
Yeah, we'll,
Next week I am here, 15th to 10th.
We'll
Wednesday, well, actually, Wednesday morning, the 15th, I am here, but in the afternoon, then I leave.
we'll
for
send
about-
out some, we'll send out some dates.
we want to
for
do it
everybody.
before the 12th.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yep. I am here all next week.
So if I could suggest, we'll go chat with Shannon, and she'll maybe get a quick doodle poll out for the next, week and a half or so, looking at availability.
Yeah, we'll focus on next week.
Okay. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
excellent. Thank you, everybody.